right?
No, well, it has to
Just
happen
pressed it.
organically. You were in the magic.
Hello, we are
Hi.
live once again for parts 3 and 4 of this crazy little adventure we've been on, Brian.
Yeah, this is you were saying off the air when we did the almanac. We used to record 6 episodes a day for 5 days, and
Yeah.
we were prepping before, like leading up to those episodes and between them.
And
So
I was
I remember,
editing
like,
every
would
episode.
record. Oh, right. So you were editing too. So we would record 2. I guess you'd edit them. I'd furiously like try and prepare for teams far enough ahead so that I was ready the next day. And
What were
also
we
it was like
thinking?
40 degrees.
Yeah, it was an insane thing we did. I took
Yeah.
a week off of work. This is the thing that bugged me the most. I took like a week off of work, which is like, that's
That's
valuable.
worth money.
I only have like 3-4, weeks of vacation. And then we had to still, well, this is like a sub thing, but I don't like how then I had to like pay taxes on our earnings from the almanac, but it was like based off of my, it's like I take my, like whatever I earn from my main job, and then the almanac earnings is like on top of that. So it's like at the higher tax bracket.
Oh, la-di-da.
Even though higher than whatever, it starts at 20,000 where the first tax bracket comes in. But
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, and then it's like, but I used my vacation time.
Yeah.
So I'm using my vacation time, which I didn't like give 50%, or the government did give me 50%. I'm not against paying taxes, by the way. Like I appreciate, but I just feel like I did extra work and I gave up vacation time just so that the government of Canada can get half of, or like, some pretty close to half of the earnings. It was a lot of work. And remember, I banged my head the day before the second one. Like I had this bandage. What insane.
Did you get hit by, was that when you were hit on your bike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dina tells me that she always thought it was so stupid that I was like in the hospital, like they're like wrapping me, doing whatever, and then it's like I'm just like, oh
no, I've got an almanac.
yeah, I was like, I'm so worried that I won't be able to do the almanac because like I'd been prepping for like weeks, like preparing for this thing.
It was a crazy lead up. Shams, you'll be happy to know that KK is it is a corp now.
Now it is.
In fact, if we were incorporated then, Elon, you would have made more from the almanac.
I know, but we wouldn't take the money out. It would be still in the corporation, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell them the name of the corporation?
Yeah. It's funny. I think you put one over on me.
How so?
It's Brelan Entertainment Limited. But like I only get the bruh, and then you get your full Elon in there.
Well, you have an AN in Brian. You could say that the AN is from your name, and I'm only getting the EL.
Well, I mean,
I'm getting 4 letters, and you're getting 4 letters. It's not my fault you have a 5-letter name.
Whose fault is it then? I want to speak to them.
You know that my dad once had a really clever idea. This is like his words for a license plate. My brother's name is Joel, so it was going to be Joelan because then it would spell both of our names, and it was going to be like Joelan. But then he got to the place and it was taken, so he came home and the license was Elon Joe. ELANJO. I've got a lot of stupid license plates. My parents are like the perfect demographic for buying these like vanity license plates. My mom has one right now.
I remember seeing that license plate around. I'd totally forgotten.
So my mom's license plate right now. So her name is Dina, Deana, and she got a license plate when she became a grandmother, and it's like Bubby Dena. So it's BUBY and then DENA. Which isn't how you spell either of the words, but you got to squeeze it in, and it's very important.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's so good. The best I can share is like the other day, like my full initials, like with my middle names, BSRK. And I've seen license plates that start BSRK that aren't vanity plates.
Yeah, they got it for free.
I could have had my initial. I could have had it for free, but I missed it. I have one that starts with B and another that starts with BB and CP or something are the 2 license plates. I missed it.
I could never. I could never have a vanity license plate. It's such a, to me, I don't know what it is. There's like a block in my brain where I just feel like it's too stupid. But
I mean,
it seems like something that you would like.
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I would like
It
something
would be an ironic.
serendipitous to happen with
Sure,
my
yeah.
license plate and to make meaning of it that way, but not to pay for the privilege. I had a friend who like had an inside joke with his friends that like they call it like we're gonna have a general hang, and so his friend got that license plate in New York without any of the vowels, and he applied for it in Ontario and it got rejected for like being offensive or vulgar, and he had
General
to appeal
hang?
it. Yeah.
Like, what's the offensive
I don't
part?
know. It was GNRLHNG.
Maybe they thought it was like hung.
Yeah, maybe they thought it was like violent or like, I don't know. When I see it, I kind of see the word gonorrhea. So I wonder if, anyway, maybe when they just have no idea what you're going for.
Yeah, they don't want to.
They reject it.
Accidentally accept something that they didn't mean to. All right.
As part of his appeal, he sent pictures like the state of New York approved this exact vanity plate already.
Yeah. You want to be worse than New York?
Elon Joe, how does your brother feel about that?
I'm sure he felt like shit. But what can he do?
Your dad didn't have a backup plan.
Yeah, I wanted something. Can't not get a vanity plate.
I mean, like imagine? I would walk away and like think it over. Nope. I just see your dad like flustered. Like, okay, okay, Elon Joe, do you have that?
And yes, it's like, God. They were probably like, oh, but it's actually twice the price. Doesn't matter. All right, let's start the recording here. Thanks so much for joining, Adam and Shams. Damn, you guys are super fans here 2 days in a row.
Oh yeah, the best.
The best. Adam actually talked to Shane. Adam and I are working on a trade right now, but he has to wait to talk to his co-manager Shane, who's in, what was it, Taiwan? Well, I think the team is Taiwan.
Yeah, Shane's in Taiwan.
Yeah, wake up, Shane.
And I guess shout out also to Fantasy Hockey Life, who's also just churning out the content.
Oh yeah,
these days.
I want to listen to it. I need to get it. I started watching.
You. I need to catch up on 32 beats before.
Please. I kind of feel a little bit like I'm waiting for my messages from you saying like, oh, great interview with this person. I really like this part. I'm waiting. They haven't come yet.
Well, I'm going to have to listen to them all like back to back in a 2-day period. And I probably won't.
Why?
Be somewhere where I can write to you while I listen.
You need to add podcast listening to your like regime somehow. Like when you like go to the washroom or like maybe before bed, you need to like
I'm in the washroom. I'm not in the, like you listen if you're in the bathroom for like 2 to 5 minutes.
I mean, I get through a lot of podcasts. Yeah, every minute of the day that I'm not using my brain for something else, I'm listening to podcasts. That's how I get through so many podcasts. My problem.
But then how do you pay attention to the podcast? Like I could do that.
No, I said when I'm not using my brain, that's when I'm listening to the podcast.
Even when, yeah.
Like when I'm in the washroom, I don't need. Well, sometimes I'm on my phone, and then I'm obviously not. It's like half responding to things on Discord and half listening to, I have to, it depends.
I don't know. Yeah, but I would tune, like, as I'm doing other things while casually listening.
What about walking? Do you ever go for like a walk? Just walk around?
Not lately.
Oh, it's nice. It's a nice activity.
Yeah,
I try to get myself out. Yeah, tennis wouldn't be so bad if you had like a little wireless earbuds. You could listen to podcasts while you're playing tennis.
You're right. I'm sure the person I'm playing with might take offense.
Well, what do they care?
And like again, I couldn't take notes. Like if I heard something great.
Oh, take notes. Well, I mean, I don't don't take notes while I listen to podcasts.
Well, like, or send you a note saying something was good.
True. All right. Well, yeah, I don't know.
I know your work is outstanding.
I don't say. By the way, so the reason why I haven't listened to Fantasy Hockey Life yet is I made a big mistake and I started watching Big Brother. And they have 3 episodes a week. And then Rob C has a recap episode after each episode of Big Brother. So I've added so many hours of podcast to my already stacked schedule by mistake.
How do you have the time? How do you make time for that?
I just listen all the time to podcasts. But
that's new time.
I know.
That's
I don't know.
Hours of new
I mean,
time.
It helps when I'm not recording podcasts all the time. Like these past 2 days, I've been falling behind a little bit. I haven't even finished Sunday's, podcast. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so I don't know. Hi, Hopple Nuts. Okay, let's go. So Brian, right?
If you feel comfortable sharing your name, like we can probably look it up. But
I'm gonna look it up right now. I'm too embarrassed that I keep saying I'm gonna find it. Don't even write it in the chat. I want to show how
I'm gonna race you.
I'm a hacker.
Oh my God, why isn't it? It's not loading. Tom.
But not Tom, not Tom Crowhurst, right?
It's Tom and Nicole.
Oh, there it is. I found it too.
Hopefully you don't mind, Hobble.
Patron since, where does it say that thing? Oh, I don't have the screen.
October 2018.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's almost 3 years.
I don't know if this is Tom or Nicole or both. Maybe you guys do everything together. That'd be great.
Adam just nailed the joke to start, so that's the best. So now I'm ready to start. Brian, ready to start the recording?
Shams, your full name is Shamstron, is it not?
Does Shams not have it in the let me check here. Yeah, we have Shams. Can I say it?
Name. No, don't Shams. No, Elon.
Initials.
Well, what are you trying to prove?
B'nai Amitai. Okay, Brian, so let's start the recording. I know there's actually another person named Shams at one point, a former patron. Shams Laud. Oh, anyways, yeah.
Let's name all declined.
You sent him a sticker.
Oh yeah.
The other Shams. We should send this Shams a sticker. This Shams is much better than the other Shams.
Shams definitely does it. Like, we should send it.
Do you still have more stickers?
I think I have a few somewhere. I can
get them all the Shams for sure.
Give them all the Shams.
Oh, and Tom and Adam, of course.
Like Smoke's Poutineery, like their
used to work there.
Method is so rude. They just like hand out these stickers and people literally just stick them all over like the city, like public, like signs and sidewalks.
I don't like
buildings.
That.
It's just
I don't like that at all.
It's really irresponsible. Anyway, let's start. Send Shams a bunch of stickers and then he can do that.
Yeah, we're going for like 2.5 hours here, so I guess we should probably.
I'm ready.
All right, so okay, so 3. You ready? I'm gonna count down. 3, 2, 1. Record.
Sorry.
For real?
Yeah.
I thought you were joking. Now, okay. 3, 2, 1. Record.
Recording. I was ready actually like a long time ago, and then I moved the window away.
That's okay. All right.
Yeah, I love that voice.
What voice?
Recording in progress.
I don't hear that. Oh, when I do it on Zoom. I see. That's just a backup. I don't even need that. Okay, so here we go.
Should we name Adam? Should we look up Adam's full name too?
It's in the chat already. Well, it's literally his username. It
looks like a shortened last name.
Oh, I don't know. That could be a real name.
You seem really intent on just naming everybody.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. If you don't want to be doxxed, just write in the chat, do not dox me.
Okay. I'm not going to name anyone else. Right, don't forget to do more muting of yourself while I'm talking. Do you want to race
to find Tom's home address?
No, I want to start the show.
Okay.
But yeah, actually, while I was editing yesterday, I did find there were lots of parts where you had little like bumps while I was talking. So it's a problem. I edited it all out. It's a pristine thing.
Amazing.
Use your get that mutify going.
Yeah, it's up here.
But I know it's tricky because I also do want to get the ha-has.
I like to be live.
I know I like to, if I make a joke, it's like when I'm doing my interviews, I'm doing a lot of like I'm muted.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Let mute again.
Yeah, you don't want to miss those big moments.
Yeah, I wonder if people like that when they're listening to my interviews and they hear me going, "Oh, is that like useful? Do I need to keep those?"
I don't know.
Interesting. Oh yeah,
I'm sure there is some data on it done by the big podcast companies.
I do it more like just to show the person I'm interviewing that I'm engaged. It's like a conversation, it's weird. But I wonder if like when you're listening, if you need to hear the, Anyway, all right, let's start. Here we go.
Julia, I've noted your request in the chat.
We've said his name. Is this the Julianne who's like
Elon? No more.
You said it on many episodes.
You just can't help yourself.
I didn't think it would be someone who made a show naming himself on the show. All right.
I'm afraid you're going to say something that we all regret.
Is the 97 for McDavid? Or is that part of doxing Elon. Also? Okay, let's go. Yeah! Yes! Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest-running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who would totally let Ben and Lewis get surgery if they asked us. I'm your host, Elon Dubrowski, and with me, as always, Brian is scoffing at my joke here. I'm trying my best, okay? Off the cuff.
I'm not scoffing, but just without context, it's such a weird thing to say. Like, I know what we're talking about this episode, and it still took me the amount of time that you saw me scoffing, about 3 seconds, to connect the dots. And maybe that means I'm slow and our listeners will have gotten it quicker. But if you haven't gotten it yet, today we are covering all the offseason action in the Atlantic Division, which includes the Buffalo Sabres, which includes Jack Eichel.
Not funny if you have to explain it.
Well, you made a separate Twitter account at one point to explain the jokes I made on Twitter.
Yeah, it was necessary.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome everybody. It's nice to be with you. I'm Brian Com, and with me is our host and intrepid leader, Elon Dubrowski. And as you might have heard, over the last couple days, we have been breaking down all of the off-season movement that's happened during these crazy. It was an amazing period of activity. One of the best I think we've had in a few years. My hopes were pretty down for what free agency would bring in the draft. And then boom, everything just exploded. It was like a huge domino effect, which was lovely. So yeah, everything that happened in expansion, in the entry draft, and in the free agent market, all the player movement that happened around it. We've talked about the Pacific, we've talked about the Metropolitan, and today we are talking about the Atlantic.
Yeah, I'm excited to work through this division. A lot of cool things happened. Before we get to it, of course, let's mention that we are presented proudly so by DobberHockey.com. They've already broken down all of these moves. If you like to read things, go to Dobber Hockey. You've got articles breaking down the fantasy impact of every single one of these transactions or acquisitions or whatever. And it's like, well written. I really like it. I always read every article at Dobber Hockey. I'm not even lying. It's a great site, DobberHockey.com. But with that, okay, Brian, so let's start in Florida. I'm going to try to, again, order by teams based on how interested I am in the moves they made. And obviously, we have to start in Florida because I think, I mentioned in the last episode that New Jersey got the biggest prize in free agency, getting Dougie Hamilton. But I've got to imagine Florida, at least as of now, Jack Eichel hasn't been traded yet. So I think Florida got the best return in a trade because they acquired Sam Reinhart from the Buffalo Sabres, who's this really great player. And they got him for next to nothing. I did an episode just recently with David Dwork, right, where we were talking about the Florida Panthers. It was basically just us both gushing over how good this team is. The Florida Panthers came fourth in the league last year in points. Unfortunately, they had to face Tampa in the first round. So they were off in the first round, but they took them to 6 games. That probably could have gone either way. And then, Florida, the one player they've lost is Chris Driedger, which, could be bad considering he was their best goalie last year, but no big deal. Spencer Knight showed last year that he has the potential to be just as good as Driedger was in a tandem with Bobrovsky. Florida has gone ahead and re-signed or extended all of their standouts from last year: Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart, Anthony Duclair, Gustav Forsling, Brandon Montour. They're all coming back. They've also got all these young players, these exciting young players. Owen Tippett played last year. We could expect him to maybe be better. Lundell should be ready to play. Denisenko might make the team. Honestly, some of these great players might not make the team just because of how stacked they are. Oh, Aaron Ekblad is healthy now. If you recall, he was injured at the end of last season. That's one of the top defensemen in the league. And if that wasn't enough, like I said, they made this huge splash acquiring Sam Reinhart from the Sabres for a 2022 first. So hopefully for Florida, this will be a very late pick, and it'll be very much worth it. They also sent a goalie, Devon Levy. So we'll see if we ever mention him on Keeping Karlsson again. So let's break down this Reinhart acquisition. He had 40 points in 54 games last season. That's a 61-point pace. That's on the Sabres. And I know for a while, Reinhart's been on the Sabres and has put up pretty good points. And you can say, oh, he's playing with Eichel. Of course, he's putting up good points. But note that at the end of last season, he had 14 points in his final the end of last season, he had 14 points in his final 14 games when Eichel was injured, centering Olofsson and Skinner, and he was still putting up a point per game. So he doesn't necessarily need Eichel to produce. Looking at David Dwork's projected lines from some tweet he made, which is totally not official or anything, but just thinking about what the Panthers might do. But he had Reinhart right on the right side of Barkov on the top line with Verhaeghe because the Panthers seem fine for center, right? They don't need Reinhart to play center because they've got Sam Bennett, who can center the second line. We saw how well Bennett did in that spot last year. So Brian, all that considered, and the power play, right? Like I could imagine definitely a Barkov, Huberdeau, Reinhart, then Hornqvist or Bennett at the net front, Ekblad running at the QB. Like that's a hot power play. Reinhart's a big part of that. So yeah, how high should we be on Sam Reinhart for next season? I know I'm normally like the guy who's a little reticent about overhyping guys in new situations, but I think there's an exception because Reinhart is A, leaving Buffalo, and B, going to the team that's known for making players better. It seems like everyone who leaves their team and goes to Florida has a breakout season. So how can we not just be so super stoked about Sam Reinhart? Point per game, at least?
There's a lot of reason to be super stoked about Sam Reinhart. To say at least point per game might be taking it a bit too far, but you're right. Usually when a guy leaves Buffalo, we leave ourselves very open to the possibility that there's a bump. We've seen players get a bump leaving Buffalo, and the opposite of a bump, a crater. When they arrive in Buffalo, things just don't go well for players there over the last decade or so. And after last season's disaster, it's pretty impressive that Reinhart, as a Sabre, managed to still contribute at a pace that made him fantasy relevant for almost the whole season. There were one or two pockets in there where it's like, do I bother holding this guy anymore? But he rewarded anybody who was able to practice any reasonable amount of patience for him to succeed and come up. Reinhart thrived on the power play, especially with 16 power play points in 54 games, which is a 24 power play point pace in an 82 game season. And he got that pace thanks in large part to a whopping 10 power play goals in 54 games. It's tied for 5th in the whole NHL. Elon, it's actually a weird list to see the top power play goal scorers in the NHL last season. Do you want to take a crack and see if you can get any of the guys who ranked ahead of Sam Reinhart?
Well, I guess I'd be a stupid idiot to guess Alex Ovechkin.
Well, I don't know if it makes you a stupid idiot, but it's not. Ovechkin's not there.
Okay, I don't know. Connor McDavid. Obviously, it's not. I guess if you're saying it's a weird list, it means I'm probably not going to get it. So why don't you just tell me?
I mean, I'm going to say these names. 2 of them you're going to be like, oh, and 2 of them you're going to be like, So I think the 2 that you would expect after I name them, Draisaitl and Joe Pavelski.
Oh, I said McDavid. I should have just said Draisaitl with
him. You were very close. And then TJ Oshie and Chris Kreider also ranking in the top 4 in power play goals last season. But Sam Reinhart right up there with him for whatever that's worth based on that group of names. But I should mention that Sam Reinhart did score those 10 power play goals on just 23 power play shots on goal. So he shot at a nearly 45% conversion rate. So that's why I'm not about to go absolutely crazy cuckoo for Sam Reinhart, but I'm happy having him at 60 points. And the upside for point per game is there if Reinhart plays Barkov's wing and on the power play for the majority of the season. He's not someone that I think I'm going to reach for and try and be super cool and be like, oh yeah, Sam Reinhart is about to have this crazy breakout season. I'm going to take him before anyone because I'm smarter and I see it coming. No, but when I get to 60-point guys or somewhere thereabouts in my draft list, Reinhart is going to be right around the top of that tier as someone who has the potential to really blow the doors off that number if things break well for him.
Okay, that's fair. If he falls that far for you, and I guess you're saying you're happy for someone else to take him if they really want to reach. So Brian, we're actually, ranking players, as you know, with the patrons every single day. We just put William Nylander on the list today as number 54. Sam Reinhart was in the running with Nylander, and some other players with votes are Philip Forsberg and Chris Letang. So maybe let's not consider Letang because it's apples and oranges, but Nylander, Forsberg, or Reinhart, who would you pick first?
I would go Nylander first because I think he also has more to show this year than he was able to last year. I can see getting 70 points. He has similar upside to Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart's upside might actually be higher than Nylander's, but I have more confidence that Nylander is going to hit his or hit a higher number as like the base expectation.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I don't know. I'm really just like, you go to Florida, you explode. But I guess there's like so many good players on this team, but there's only so many points to go around. So maybe that would be a reason to maybe not be as high on Reinhart. Like they can't all get 80 points.
Can I throw something wild out there? Like, please. I know, and like, it might not be in the direction you're thinking I'm going. It's about COVID, which I know we're so tired of talking about.
I love it. I'm just kidding. It's terrible.
Are we at all worried about drafting players from a state like Florida where things are like completely out of control? Like they've done one of the worst jobs, it seems, from a Canadian observer from afar, from what I've read. Florida doesn't seem to been doing a great job at controlling things. And so I worry if that's more likely to affect players in their lineup. This is like, I don't want to have these considerations for another season. So that's why I said it was something wild. And I don't know if you have any comment or
I don't know.
not on whether this does take some value away from Panthers players because they're playing in one of the least safe states.
I don't know. Let's get Fauci on an episode, and then we could ask him what he thinks about
I
that.
guess
I don't know. No, it's a good point. Like, I don't know. Are they vaccinated? Like,
well, yeah. So that's the other piece here. So with my draft list, I need a column for double vaccinated. By the way, if you haven't gotten your vaccine yet, I'm just gonna gently encourage you to go do so.
Okay, me too. Okay, so I guess that's Florida. Let's go to Boston now. Brian, what's your sense of Boston's COVID risk?
Oh, I feel like the northeastern U.S. is doing. I don't want to talk. That's crazy.
Okay,
Don't lull me into this. I actually wanted to stay in Florida a little bit longer, and I'm not. I hope to not bring up COVID anymore today, or really ever. But in Florida, Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast recently mentioned that Spencer Knight is going to be the starter. What do you think of that?
Is he the coach?
No, but he's a guy who seems to know what is happening on every team in the NHL.
What does that even mean?
He might know what the coach is thinking. He might know what the organization's plans are.
Okay, good to know. We'll see. I talked to, if you listen to my interview with David Dwork, right? Like we talked obviously about that and and he said like, yes, Spencer Knight's really good. Like Bobrovsky struggled. The Panthers, I believe David specifically said he's hoping, the Panthers are hoping they could go like 50-50 because that's how you be successful. And obviously if there become like really important games down the stretch where they just need to win, then obviously they're going to go with the goalie that's playing better and gives them the best chance to win. But I don't think even Quenneville knows like who's the starter. Like, what does that even mean? The starter in today's NHL? Like, it's not Vasilevsky. It's not as if Spencer Knight's going to get I think that. Well, let's see who starts on opening night. But I don't think that Elliot Friedman knows this unless he's cited. If he says, "Hey, I was just talking to do you really? Is there anyone aside from the coach or maybe the GM who you have any interest in their opinion about who's going to be the starter beyond just like us on a podcast? Like guessing."
Yeah. Elliot freaking Friedman.
Is this
things? And to be honest, I didn't listen to it firsthand, so I'm not sure what he did source or where.
Like, why are you bringing it up then?
Well, because
you heard that someone said on a podcast that you didn't listen to that Spencer Knight is going to be the starter on Florida. This is what we had to not go to Boston for.
What? Okay. All right. Well, when Spencer Knight is your opening night starter, don't say I didn't tell you.
No, I mean, I also probably think that Spencer Knight's going to be the starter at some point. But it's like, or maybe even to start. Like, I think he's a really good goalie. I just don't know why, if Elliot Friedman says it, it makes it any more true. But definitely grab Spencer Knight. Hey, Brian, as we go through, we're going to be talking about some goalies. I'm going to be Spencer Knight versus that guy for every single goalie. So it's definitely going to come in handy.
I can't wait. And I'm going to say if what Elliot Friedman said was true, then.
Okay, perfect. So let's go to Boston now. So obviously their biggest move was to extend Taylor Hall for 4 years at $6 million per year. So this is a guy who had a rough year last year for most of it, in Buffalo especially, 19 points in 37 games. But then he went to Boston, had a great end to the season, 14 points in 16 games, playing on the second line with Krejci and Craig Smith for the most part. In the playoffs, not as productive, only 5 points in 11 games. So all that rounds together to a 51-point pace overall in the regular season. He had a 66-point pace the year before with Arizona and New Jersey. So Hall's been around the block a bit, but now we've got 4 years probably of him staying in Boston. So I guess now one big change already that's going to happen for Taylor Hall is that David Krejci just announced that he's going back to the Czech Republic. So he's not going to be centering Taylor Hall. We're going to talk soon about some of the options they brought in that will maybe take over. The Fluto Shinzawa mentioned that maybe it might just be time for Jack Studnicka to jump in as a second line center with Hall and Craig Smith. But in the meantime, I guess let's just close the book on Taylor Hall here. What kind of production are we expecting from this guy? To me, like I see him like probably a 60-point guy. Like he's going to be a second liner. Maybe he gets top power play, maybe not. Last year, he wasn't even getting top power play while he was there. And they definitely have other options that maybe fit a role that's like a net front thing because they already have obviously Marchand, Pastrnak, and Bergeron. So maybe put Nick Foligno in front of the net on the top power play or something. So yeah, I don't know. To me, 60 points is probably where I'm going to be drafting Taylor Hall. Actually, maybe an interesting question for you to answer as part of your answer is Sam Reinhart or Taylor Hall. I'd go Reinhart.
I was going to ask you that, but you asked me first. So I'll try and answer it after I tell you what I think about Taylor Hall in Boston, which is actually, I don't love it for Taylor Hall, who last year, we remember how starry-eyed and surprised we all were when he signed that one-year show-me contract with Buffalo. It seems like a world of time ago, right? We thought he'd make beautiful music with Jack Eichel. A year later, They're both gone. So is Sam Reinhart. There's this whiplash in Buffalo, but the move was like pretty WTF at the time when Taylor Hall signed in Buffalo. And so I guess it's not so surprising that that was not a long-term relationship meant to be. It's just how badly it went is still the surprising part. It's a bummer for Taylor Hall that he didn't cash in the way he probably could have last year on a long-term contract, or even get a better deal than he did with Boston this year. Although I think maybe he traded off some cash for some organizational function, which he hasn't really been around a whole lot. Think of the franchises he's played for: Edmonton, Arizona, Buffalo, New Jersey's in there. I think they run well, but those other three have big strikes against them over the last decade or so. Anyway, so this deal for Taylor Hall definitely, like you were saying, Elon, seems to put a ceiling on his production for the next short while, especially for as long as Brad Marchand is this top line player. Hall is going to be a secondary scorer with hopefully a role on the top power play. And he also doesn't have an established centerman anymore, right? Now that David Krejci is off to the Czech Republic, but apparently Boston is still shopping. That's what I've read, not from Elliot Friedman, not secondhand. I can't remember where I said. Oh, it might actually be from Elliot Friedman secondhand. Sorry, but Boston is still shopping. They have $1 million in cap space, so I'm not sure exactly what the move is. But yeah, I'd have Taylor Hall in the 60-point neighborhood, and I would take the over if I had to in trying to figure out exactly where his value lies. And I think I would still take Taylor Hall over Sam Reinhart, even though I see you nodding your head and your turn to scoff. I could easily see Reinhart outscoring Taylor Hall. And maybe this is a bad strategy thing of mine. I just feel safer with Taylor Hall, especially with Sam Reinhart moving to a new team. And remember, Duclair he got re-signed in Florida. We just skipped right past him, or we talked about him a couple weeks ago. But he's someone else who could play on Barkov's wing in the spot that you're expecting to see Reinhart. So I don't know. I know what to expect from Taylor Hall. Sam Reinhart will probably do the same and has a better chance to do better. So maybe this is foolish. Catch me on draft day. I think I would probably take Reinhart first, now that I'm really working it out in my brain. But I could see an argument for taking Taylor Hall as having the safer floor.
Yeah, I don't think he does. I think that Sam Reinhart's already established himself as a 60-point guy. Plus, we're talking about a guy that's probably going to be playing with Barkov or Huberdeau, and very, very likely on the top power play, as opposed to someone maybe being centered by Jack Studnicka or whoever Boston could get for this $1 million, and likely not playing on the top power play. So
without a center and off the top power play for sure. So I'm kind of hoping that Boston makes room for Taylor Hall on the top power play, because how do you not?
They did it last year. They didn't, and they did pretty well.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. It wasn't for the whole season.
Of course. Yeah.
And I'm still waiting to see if they pull in a center. So I think it's too early to make that full decision. But as things stand now, it's a power play to Taylor Hall, and Jack Studnicka is his center. Although don't forget Eric Halla's in there too.
I will mention them in a sec. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I guess also, like, for me anyways, like, I'm going to project Reinhart right now off the top of my head, 70-point Reinhart, 60-point Hall. That's what I've got. Let's talk about some other acquisitions. So you brought up, we could do it now. So Eric Haula, Nick Foligno, Thomas Nosek. They've brought in some depth guys, which is good for Boston, right? You need to have a bottom six. My guess is, that second line is going to be Hall with Craig Smith and someone centering it. If it's not Studnicka, maybe it could be Eric Haula. I feel like my gut is that Eric Haula is a third line center, not a second line center. Like, not that Studnicka is maybe much better. Either way, maybe not much difference. There's also obviously still, what's that guy's name? Oh yeah, Charlie Coyle in the mix, who could maybe jump up to center the second line. Foligno, I could see him potentially getting a top power play spot. Maybe he's the new Nick Ritchie, but he's never. He hasn't paced for more than 40 points in any of the previous 4 seasons, so hard to get too excited about Foligno. Do you want any quick comments about Foligno, Haula, or Nosek before we switch to the goalies?
Yeah, I'll go through them quickly. So Foligno, 35-point guy before coming to Boston. I don't see things turning out much differently here for him in Boston's mid-six, even if he does get a power play 1 turn ahead of Hall, because he does have that established net front role in a 1-3-1. I still don't think he's going to be worth more than 40 points. Still might give you lots of hits and decent blocks for a forward, but beyond that peripheral value, I don't see much worth thinking about in Nick Foligno beyond streaming. Eric Haula, man, I remember this amazing season he had with Vegas, and I bought in on it. To the next season, I was like, yeah, he can do it again, even though, not an even though, actually. I just thought he could. his season, I was going to say, even though his really great season was powered by picking up 18 power play points on Vegas's 1B power play unit when they split their units in that first year, he hasn't seen that role again since. He's never had a chance to really match those totals from his first year in Vegas. So it's been really disappointing to watch Haula not get those opportunities and fall back down to being a 40-point guy, barely shoots. He's on his 5th team in 4 years, and his 5-on-5 scoring in Nashville just cratered last season. So I'm looking at Haula in Boston and wondering, is there any room to hope here for Erik Haula? And I'm looking in Vegas. Okay, who did he play with? He played with James Neal and Eric Perrin. Oh my God. Played with James Neal and David Perron. So maybe Taylor Hall could be Erik Haula's David Perron, and could Craig Smith be his James Neal? I don't know. I'm not getting my hopes up, but I am trying to mentally prepare myself for the possibility that Haula is a second line center and might be up to the task. As for Tomas Nosek, he's one of those third liners in Vegas last season who were producing like mad, along with Nicholas Roy and Keegan Colasar. They were just putting up points down the stretch with no real reason to believe it would continue, but also no real reason to believe it would stop. So we'll see where Nosek slots in. If he's in a top 6 role, I'd be curious to see if he can be relevant, but I'm not sure that's where he's going to fit in Boston. So between the three, Nosek, Foligno, and Haula, I see very little fantasy value, but a little bit of upside. You're muted.
Right. Yeah, I definitely do not think that Tomas Nosek is going to be slotting in the top 6. I don't think you have to worry about that. And Haula, yeah, unfortunately for him, he had a lot of injury trouble after that really great season. I think maybe he could have kept up what he was doing, but it hurts to be injured. I'd imagine not only physically, but also the fact that maybe he's a little slower. Now he's a little older. So it's hard to imagine him getting back to that. What was it? 55 points in 76 games with Vegas back in 2017-18. What a year for the Vegas Golden Knights and Erik Haula. All right, let's go into the net. But I remember how someone on Discord was calling me out for I was saying nets too much. And I was like, let's look in nets. Apparently you're not supposed to say that. Just say, let's look in net. I never knew.
It's very street hockey of you to say who's in nets.
Yeah, I've been saying my whole life. So I got to unlearn this. So Boston, obviously, Tuukka Rask is injured. He's going to have hip surgery, or I guess he's already had the hip surgery maybe by now. I'm not sure, but like he's expected to be gone until at least January or February. And, who knows what he'll be like when he gets back. If he comes back, there could be complications. So obviously Boston had to make other arrangements. They have Jeremy Swayman, who was so great at the end of last year. They decided not enough. They didn't want to go with Dan Vladar. They sent him, I believe, to Calgary. Is it? Yeah, we talked about that in the last episode. So they signed Linus Ullmark to pretty long-term contract, 4 years, $5 million per year. I didn't know, or I didn't expect that Boston would do that just because it looked like Swayman was so good, but why not just have this insurance? And Ullmark, he's been really good when he plays. Like he had a .915 save percentage in 34 games in 2019-20, a .917 save percentage in 20 games last year. And it's on the Buffalo Sabres, right? So you should probably bump that up like 0.05 save percentage points if he was on any other team, I'd imagine. But unfortunately, he's missed like so much time with groin injuries. Hopefully he'll be 100% going into next year. Assuming he is, Brian, what do you think about this Ullmark-Swayman tandem? Is this going to be the new Rask and Halak, which were one of the best tandems in the league? And then obviously the other question is like, who do you think can get more starts here? It's like on one hand, I feel like Swayman, like how can you not keep riding him the way he was playing? But on the other hand, you're paying Ullmark a lot of money not to be a backup.
So, they are. The Bruins are paying Ullmark a lot of money, which really caught me by surprise. Like Ullmark is fine. He seems to be, an average goalie in the NHL from his body of work so far. But paying him $5 million for 4 years, that seems like it could end up being rich, especially if he doesn't play up to it, and especially when Swayman and Vladar might not have been that far off. They both looked like, hey, maybe they could handle a workload.
No. Vladar was brutal in the games he played. I'm not sure where he got that from.
Well, I mean, there was talk for a couple of years leading up. So yeah, maybe in what he actually played, but he was supposed to be someone who could take on some NHL action, even though he never really got the chance to find his stride with the Bruins.
Yeah, when I talked to Fluto, he said like, "There's no way the Bruins. It's like this is the last year of Bergeron's contract. The window is closing. Like they're not going to risk it on Swayman and Vladar."
Exactly, and that makes total sense. But is Ullmark the one to be unrisky with? And also, I guess that's what the market called for, $5 million for 4 years. I do have my concerns, and I've shared them a lot in our Discord community. Whenever someone asks a keeper question about the Bruins or the Bruins goalies, it's like, hey, Bergeron and Marchand are entering the twilight of the careers. Boston is going for it, but before long, you're going to be in trouble. Having a Boston goalie on your team in all likelihood, unless they can just pull bargain bin Taylor Halls out of free agency repeatedly over the next few years. So in a cap league, that makes me hesitant to jump at Allmark. But in a 1 year, I'd be happy to grab that Boston tandem. I could see Allmark and Swayman battling for a spot through the year and sharing time being the status quo arrangement, unless one proves to be either really unreliable or really outstanding with their play. So when you say kind of like Rask Halak, I mean, Allmark and Swayman have not earned the reputations that Rask and Halak had, but I could certainly see a similar dynamic where they know the net is going to be shared. And both of those guys had some good runs. Did you hear like motorcycles? No?
I did, but it's no big deal.
Okay. And both those guys had some good runs and some bad runs that didn't really disrupt the 50-50 share. So I think it's probably going to be a 50-50 share with enough leeway for it's probably going to be a 50-50 share with enough leeway for goalies to perform one way or the other, unless, like I said, something remarkable happens with either of their play in either direction.
Yeah, I think that this is a pretty decent tandem to draft if you're going to draft a tandem, because like Allmark might get injured, in which case you just have Swayman and you can stash Allmark in your IR. Or if Allmark's healthy, I feel like they're probably going to want to play him more than Swayman since they signed to this contract and Swayman's still young and learning. And eventually Swayman could even be AHL bound if Rask is healthy and able to come back and signs a contract with them. So I guess we'll see what happens. So Brian, I guess I got to ask you, Spencer Knight or Linus Allmark? Who would you take between the two?
I think I'll go Spencer Knight, especially if now I'm not going to go back to the Elliot Friedman well, but yeah, I would go Spencer Knight. But I do like what you said about Allmark and Swayman maybe being a good value tandem, because neither one has huge name value recognition or really proven track record. So that's a tandem you might be able to pick up pretty late in your draft.
Yeah, I think that Boston's still going to be a good team next year, as long as they've got Bergeron. And like you say, like Bergeron and Marchand are on the twilight of their careers, which like makes sense considering their ages, but it doesn't seem true based on their production. Like they seem to be playing just as well as ever. So who knows how much longer they can go. Maybe they will extend Bergeron depending on how he's feeling. I remember Fluto Shinzawa in my interview with him, he was saying how he thinks after this year, it'll probably be like 1 year contracts for Bergeron until he decides he wants to hang it up. I guess one last thing about the Bruins, they signed Mike Riley to a 3-year, $3 million per year contract. So he's someone who they acquired at the trade deadline last year, had 19 assists in 40 games with Ottawa, then 8 assists in 15 games with Boston. No goals in any of those games, but he actually took 98 shots last year. So it's not as if he was like not shooting at all. Maybe he even deserved a goal or two throughout the entire season. But yeah, 40-point pace. So a career year for this 28-year-old, earning him this nice contract extension. I wonder if he'll be able to maintain this pace next season. Like again, from my interview with Fluto Shinzawa, he said we can expect McAvoy finally this year to hold the power play one job going into next season after the insane playoffs that he had. And for people who didn't listen, McAvoy had 8 power play points in 11 games during the playoffs. It would be crazy for Coach Cassidy to not just keep rolling McAvoy on the top power play. If you put Grzelcyk back there because he's like left-handed or whatever, like don't even try it. Okay, it's McAvoy's job now. But that means that I guess if we had to pick the second best Bruin defenseman to draft, I guess it would be between Mike Riley and Matt Grzelcyk. Probably this is like a silly question because in most leagues you're not going to draft either of these guys, but I think I'd take Riley over Grzelcyk.
Yeah, sure. I think I would also take Riley over Grzelcyk, unless you're thinking, well, maybe there still is a chance Grzelcyk gets up to power play one. But after last year, I would love to have some certainty in Boston to know who we can expect to quarterback that top unit most of the year. And the fact that Fluto said McAvoy makes me feel good about it being Charlie McAvoy. So that makes Mike Riley, maybe he can be the McAvoy in the McAvoy-Krug combo where, while McAvoy becomes the Krug and steps up to be something bigger than what he's been, Riley can be this 35, 40-point player with minimal peripheral contributions, but doesn't make him that valuable in fantasy unless you're looking for a pretty deep depth defenseman.
Yeah, I guess he's probably not someone you draft, but he's probably going to be the type of player that's going to get streamed in and out of lineups whenever Boston has a good schedule and people need D. All right, so Brian, next we're going to go to the team that formerly had Sam Reinhart and Linus Allmark and now has kind of no one. And so we'll get to the Buffalo Sabres in just a sec. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay, we are back. And like I said, Brian, we're going to talk about what Buffalo did. And it's a lot of loss and not much gain. So I'm definitely worried about this team for next year. So first of all, we've got these Jack Eichel trade rumors. Who knows? By the time we release this episode, we're recording this Monday night, and we still haven't released the Metropolitan Division episode at the time of this recording. So I guess it's still a couple days. So who knows if Eichel will be traded by the time we release this. But as of now, he's still on the team. We'll see if he starts next year. So they've traded Sam Reinhart to Florida. They traded Rasmus Ristolainen to Philly for Robert Hagg, 2021 first, who turned into Isaac Rosen with 11th overall. Then, as far as players coming in to replace these big losses, we've got Will Butcher coming from New Jersey. So I don't know, maybe Butcher and Ristolainen actually aren't that far apart. Obviously in fantasy, they're far apart because Risto has all the peripherals. But I don't even know if it's worth having a discussion of Butcher versus Ristolainen. Get those cards up by Joe Fresh. It's not Joe Fresh, Jay Fresh, the guy on Twitter who has all these great cards, like breaking down the players. I'd like to see Will Butcher versus Risto. They've signed Drake Kajula and Vinny Hinostroza. So classic random Buffalo people that we're never going to mention on the podcast. And they're going to be like somehow on the top line once in a while. They've drafted Owen Power first overall. So that's obviously a big name. Power had 16 points in 26 games at the University of Michigan last year. I read that he may not play next year. So at some point we're going to do an episode breaking down the draft, and we'll ask like if Power is someone who can step in right away. It's pretty rare for a first overall pick, especially in today's NHL, to like not come in and play the very first season, but he might be the first one in a while. So who do we have left on this team is maybe the better question. So their leading scorers from last year that are still on the team are Victor Olofsson, who had 32 points in 56 games for a 47-point pace. And you know, I think Olofsson's a fine player, but I don't think he's like a play driver. I think he's the type of guy that needs to play with someone who can dish him the puck. And the best option might be Casey Middlestat, who's the next highest scoring guy left on the team. He had 22 points in 41 games, but a really strong finish. So 10 points in his final 14 games. They've, of course, still got Rasmus Dahlin, who had a huge step down last year. Unfortunately, 23 points in 56 games after he was pacing for 56 points in his sophomore season. So, okay, all that said, Brian, obviously we'll see if Eichel starts the season with the team or not. And obviously we'll see what the return is for Eichel if they trade him, because obviously maybe that person will hopefully be a really good player, if not a few. But Brian, who's the first player you're picking from the Sabres if you're going into a draft and, you know, not including Eichel? I don't like we're ranking, you know, all the players with the patrons. Like I've said, Eichel's obviously been long ranked, but I don't know when the next Sabre is going to get on this list.
It could be a really long while. I will take Rasmus Dahlin as my first Sabre pick for hopefully some power play points. And then maybe I'd add Olofsson several rounds later in the draft. And then Middlestat would be an even later flyer to take. But I might give Dahlin a chance just because I forgive him for last season. There were a lot of things out of his control, and things seem to be a total mess under Ralph Kruger. And things, the ship seemed to sort of right with their new coach. Was it not Ted Donato, Tony Granato? No. What's his name? Why can't I remember?
Don Granato.
Don Granato. Is that what I said? No, I said Tony Granato. Okay. The new coach, Don Granato. So, righted the ship with their new coach, Don Granato. So I'm hoping that there's enough stability for Don Granato. So I'm hoping there's enough stability for Dahlin to put up respectable numbers. But then I was like, okay, Buffalo is tanking really, really hard. They tanked this hard maybe about 8, 9, 10 years ago. So I went actually back to those rosters to see who the highest scoring Sabres were in those years. So going back like farthest away, you had Cody Hodgson with 44 points, Tyler Ennis 43, Christian Ehrhoff with 33. The next season, Ennis with 46, Gianta with 41, Ristolainen with 20 points. And then the next year was the year that they had Eichel with 56, O'Reilly with 60, and Ristolainen with 41 points. So I honestly don't even know, as high as Dahlin's upside is, I think on a good team, he's a 60-plus point defenseman, maybe someone who can even touch 70. On this Buffalo team, I have no idea how many points are going to be available to him. And so I feel like 45 points, maybe 50. Like, how high do you think Rasmus Dahlin can go this season?
Last season, he pays for less than 40, right? So if we're talking 45, 50, that would already...
I'm also writing off 3/4 of the season when like, that crazy losing streak, the whole, like, the Sabres were barely present.
No, I understand.
On the ice, night in, night out. So like, I want to forget 3/4 of that. Like the player personnel is worse, but I think there's probably enough stability outside of that to help make things a little more productive.
Okay, well, as of now, I think I'd probably project Dahlin for 40, 45 points and not a point higher.
So we're in the same spot. Okay.
All right. So speaking of this Buffalo tank, we haven't even gotten to the worst part, maybe, which is in net nuts, where they've lost Linus Ullmark to UFA to Buffalo. They lost Carter Hutton to, like, who cares about that anyways? I can't even believe someone signed Carter Hutton. No offense. But okay, listen to these two goalies that are on Buffalo's team for next year. They signed Aaron Dell and Craig Anderson. Like, is this really their tandem for next year? Okay, Aaron Dell played 7 games last year for New Jersey. This was a team where Mackenzie Blackwood got injured at one point. There was a lot of other goalies playing ahead of Aaron Dell, and he still couldn't get starts over Scott Wedgwood. I feel like there's probably some other name I could throw out there that was getting more starts than Aaron Dell. So anyways, in the 7 games he did play, he had an .857 save percentage. So that's probably the reason why he couldn't get more starts. Okay, then we have Craig Anderson, who actually, he only played 4 games last year, so even less than Aaron Dell. He was good in those games, .915 save percentage. He actually had 2 impressive playoff games for Washington before they got eliminated, but he is 40 years old, and I can't, that would be awesome. I'd love to see Craig Anderson have a final great season. Hey, we just saw Mike Smith do it in Edmonton, so who knows? But man, I guess maybe now's the time for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to become a full-timer, 22 years of age. He played 4 games with Buffalo last year at the end of the season. Didn't do that great. He had a .908 save percentage in 13 games in Liga. He had an .888 save percentage in 14 games with Rochester. So Ukko-Pekka was all over the place last year, which makes sense. So yeah, this team might have the worst goaltending in the league, except for Arizona, which is where I believe Carter Hutton went. But we'll get to them later.
I have this funny idea in my head that Buffalo and Arizona got into a bidding war for Carter Hutton, and Arizona won. And they both wanted a goalie who made them look respectable and who was a pro, but was going to still let them reach their goal of tanking, and that upped his value. And Buffalo fans okay, what you're paying him, Arizona, that's too rich for us. We're gonna
Brian, I think there's one thing that makes that story unlikely, which is that I think Carter Hutton signed for the league minimum $750K. So I don't know what kind of bidding war this was.
Okay, all right.
Maybe bigger bonuses potentially.
Yeah, just definitely questionable. It's crazy, that one team that wants to tank did not sign Carter Hutton. Another team that wants to tank did. Clearly they have their tank rankings just a little different. But you're asking about the Buffalo net. Yeah. I think Adam in the chat is asking sarcastically Spencer Knight or Dylan Anderson. Spencer Knight, just in case it's not sarcastic. As for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, do you want him playing in Buffalo this year? It would be kind of reminiscent. I don't know if you remember Fleury's first seasons after the lockout in, I think it was 2004, when Pittsburgh was still just a disaster, but at least Fleury had Crosby, and then he had Crosby and Malkin the next season. Luukkonen will not have players like Crosby or Malkin. I guess we'll see what the Eichel return is, but I don't think it'll be that. I don't know where Luukkonen is going to best develop. My guess is that it's not with the NHL Buffalo Sabres this year. I hope Buffalo knows what's best for his development path. I'm guessing that Luukkonen doesn't get handed the reins unless Dell and Anderson are totally incapable, which is possible.
Likely.
Right?
It's likely.
it's actually likely. So if Luukkonen comes in and plays poorly, I don't think he just keeps getting tossed in there behind this Sabres team night after night. If he plays well enough to just hold up, sure, but I just don't know how likely that is. So I think the moral of the story here is that I want the Sabres goalies even less than I want the Sharks goalies that we talked about on the Pacific episode.
Right. And let's remind people who the Sharks goalies
they
are.
Adin Hill and James Reimer. And Adin Hill seems to have the inside track to be the starter, by the way.
Yeah. So is this according to Elliot Friedman?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is according to the guy who summarized the Elliot Friedman podcast for me.
I love the research. Yeah, well, at least these two Sharks goalies are NHL goaltenders who played some games last year, unlike Aaron Dell and Craig Anderson. And by the way, all due respect to Craig Anderson, and he would be the guy I would take if I needed a Buffalo goalie at this point. So make of that what you will. Let's go to Detroit. I can't get over this Buffalo goalie thing, Brian. Remember a couple of years ago when Columbus let Bobrovsky walk for free agency, and they didn't go after a goalie, and they were like just going to run with Korpisalo and Merzlikins. We were like, are they really going to run with Korpisalo and Merzlikins? Like, isn't that like kind of risky? Like to have these two goalies that have never been a starter, that like Buffalo's like blowing that out of the water. Two goalies that barely played last year.
I would love someone to add us on Twitter at Keeping Karlsson with a worst tandem, or if you're a patron in our Discord server. I am wondering if this is the worst tandem we've like ever seen.
Well, yeah, until we get to our next episode when we talk about Joseph Kozenash and Carter Hutton in Arizona.
Well, I mean, Carter, we can debate the merits of that, but I don't know how entertaining it would be. Before we move on from Buffalo, Julien in the chat asked if Rasmus Dahlin could be a lesser Roman Josi. Remember, Josi had a good season in Nashville when everybody else didn't, because he was just the entire team's offense. And my answer to that is I don't think so. Because Nashville had some supporting cast there. Buffalo does not.
Yeah, like Nashville still had like, Nashville had like Forsberg and Johansson and Duchesne and, you know, like Granlund, like not the worst players, even though they weren't producing like maybe we hoped they would. I think Forsberg was injured in that year for a lot of it. Okay, let's go to Detroit. So Steve Yzerman, very active. I think pretty successful this offseason, as he often is. Maybe Detroit's finally going to not be like one of the worst teams in the league. I guess we'll see. Maybe they'll just wait one more year before that becomes official. But yeah, so we already talked back on episode 349 about the Nick Leddy acquisition, which may not have much fantasy relevance as we concluded, but I think it helps the team, right? You get Nick Leddy basically for free. I think they dumped a contract or something to make that happen. Plus, we learned from Prashanth Iyer in my interview with him that Moritz Seider should be ready to go. So there's a nice boost for the D right there, getting Leddy and Moritz Seider. Coming up, they obviously lost Dennis Cholowski to Seattle, but he barely played last year, so I don't think that's a big loss. Then they signed Pius Suter to center the second line, 2 years, $3.25 million per year contract. So here's some projected lines that Prashant threw out at some point, or someone I saw on Twitter threw out. But like maybe you could have Larkin with Bertuzzi and Robbie Fabry. By the way, Tyler Bertuzzi signed a contract and he's like apparently healthy. So that'll be great. And we saw that Larkin and Bertuzzi could play well. And if that happens, then that would leave Pius Suter to play with Jacob Verana and Philip Zadina. So like not terrible line mates for Suter. I keep saying, so not terrible line mates for Suter. Plus, they've got Joe Veleno and maybe Lucas Raymond, who might be ready to make the jump to become full-time NHLers next year. So all of a sudden, potentially a not terrible top nine. Like, I don't want to be like too effusive with my praise. Like, we're not talking about like huge superstars here, but I think like decent enough players. So what do you think, Brian? I guess let's focus on Pius Suter. He had 27 points in 55 games in his rookie season as a 24-year-old, 40-point pace. Think there's room for any more upside this season? Or do you think that 40-point pace is probably what we should expect for next year as well?
40-point pace for Pius. I don't know if I can say it like you. 40-point pace for Pius Suter as a 24. It's really throwing me. A 40-point pace for Pius Suter as a 24-year-old rookie? Sure, not bad, and I'm up for seeing more. Mind you, Suter played most often with Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat in Chicago last year. So while you mentioned, in Detroit, Rana and Zadina, sure, are decent as potential line mates for Suter, but they're a step down from Kane and DeBrincat. So Suter could be relevant, but I'm not sure that the 2C in Detroit is ready for relevance yet, especially if it's not someone who's proven it before. I imagine Suter starting off the season as more of a streamer type if you're searching for a point, and he'll stay that way until we see more from him on the score sheet, which I'm open to. Playing with Verana and Zadina sounds pretty good. That'd be really nice for him, but being anything beyond, say, a 50-point forward would surprise me, unless we see some really great things from him in the first 2-3 weeks of the season. I'm keeping a very open mind for him, but just based on what we've seen so far, I'm not getting so excited that he's anywhere really notable on my draft lists.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I probably won't be drafting him, but he'll be someone on my watch list to start the season. I'm curious to see how he'll do in this new situation where, like he won't have as good line mates as he had at times in Chicago, but maybe he gets a larger role, gets more minutes. So we'll have to wait and see. Some other moves by Yzerman, a lot of like exciting, but still like necessary moves. He brought like Jordan Oster's. He brought in Jordan Osterley, extended Michael Rasmussen and Mark Stahl. And then, of course, they did one thing, which I really liked, which I ranted about in the last episode. So the main beneficiaries of this improved depth on this Detroit Red Wings team will be their goalies, including Alex Nedeljkovic, who they got for a song from Carolina. This is a guy who had a .932 save percentage in 23 games with the Canes last year. Calder, finalist, and they got him for free. And then they signed him to a 2-year contract. He's going to be in a tandem with Thomas Greiss, who had a year left. Oh no, I locked my screen. One sec. You're left with that. He'll be in a tandem with Thomas Greiss, who has a year left on his contract. And Greiss had this. Did I say Greiss? Okay. He'll be in a tandem with Thomas Greiss. Oh no, guys. He'll be in a tandem with Thomas Greiss. He'll be in a tandem with Thomas Greiss, who has a year left on his contract. And Greiss had this weird year last year. It was brutal to start the season. Then was like a top goalie in the league at the tail end of the year. 962 save percentage in his final 7 games. He couldn't let in a goal. So now we'll see next year how this tandem of Greiss and Nedeljkovic will do. I guess this is obviously a theme of not only this episode, but probably most of the league. Just teams with tandems where it's very hard to predict who's going to get more games. That's going to make our Schmore Goalies episode quite interesting when we do it in a month or so. So Brian, at this point, do you see this as I do, as like a tandem? Or do you see like, is there an obvious option to you of someone who's going to run away with the job? I see this as clearly a 50-50 unless someone, struggles.
Nedeljkovic and Greiss sure looks like a tandem to me. I imagine Detroit uses Greiss maybe as a buffer at first if needed, while they take the year to see what Nedeljkovic can offer, in 2 ways, whether they want to consider Nedeljkovic longer term and who they're going to need as their second goalie, like what they need to budget for next season based on what Nedeljkovic can do. So I think it's a tandem. I think Nedeljkovic has a leg up on Greiss because he could be the starter for years to come in Detroit if he looks really good. So this is like more so than Boston. I could see this being a 60-40 split rather than a 50-50, but there's also probably a greater chance it's a 50-50 split than it is a 60-40.
Yeah, and obviously it'll depend on how these goalies do. I really hope that Nedeljkovic does well, just to rub it in Carolina's face, because I don't like the moves they made last past summer. Okay, let's go to Montreal. So unfortunately for the Habs, not unfortunately for them because it was of their own making, but most of the headlines about this team are based on like controversial things that don't really have anything to do with the lineups. Like they drafted Logan Mailloux, which I don't know if you really want to get into here, Brian, but obviously that was not something we were fans of on keeping Karlsson. Mailloux? Oh, I don't know. I've only been reading. I haven't been listening. Okay.
Classic keeping Karlsson excuse.
Drafted Logan Mailloux. Okay. Where do I start here? This whole thing's awkward. All right. Let's go next to Montreal, where unfortunately for them, but I don't want to say unfortunately for them because it's of their own making, but like most of the headlines for the Habs haven't necessarily been about their on-ice team for next year. It's been controversial things like drafting Logan Mailloux, which obviously we at Keeping Karlsson are not huge fans of. I don't know if, Brian, you want to comment on that. I'll let you speak on it if you want in a second. What does that really say? Anyway, there was also all that drama with Carey Price being unprotected for Seattle, and then the news of him potentially being injured. I don't even know. Did we get an update on that? Is Carey Price playing next year or not?
I think he's not. It's not going to be as bad as it threatened to be for the 2 or 3 day period that he was up for grabs in the expansion draft because he was unprotected.
Right. Okay. And then there's obviously this whole Shea Weber thing where he might be done for his career. So that's a lot of this is obviously very fantasy relevant that Shea Weber's not going to be there. But the Habs actually have also been kind of busy in UFA, right? So they lost Phil Deneau to the Kings. They don't seem to be in a rush to sign Tatar. So I guess that's obviously 2 big losses. I guess Tatar's not such a big loss considering they were benching him in the playoffs. Then they also brought in, I guess, a hired gun. They got Mike Hoffman, 3 years, $4.5 million AAV. Brian, I think I was away that day when that signing happened. I sort of knew about it when I was going to prep about the Habs right now, and I was looking through all their transactions. I was like, oh yeah, they signed Hoffman. Okay, so Hoffman was a goal-scoring machine in Florida. He pays for 70 points in each of his 2 seasons there. But then, like Dadonov, he didn't see as much success once he left the Sunshine State. So Hoffman had 17 goals and 36 points in St. Louis last season. Still not bad, actually. A 33-goal, 57-point pace. And this was with limited deployment. At times he was line 3, second power play. That's actually for most of the season. He only averaged around 15 minutes of ice time. And now he goes to Montreal, where pretty hard to project. Like, I have no idea where Mike Hoffman's going to slot in. Like, if the playoffs are an indication, maybe they keep Toffoli, Suzuki, and Caulfield together, and I guess that would leave Kotkaniemi to center the second line with Gallagher and Hoffman, though Josh Anderson is also there. So maybe one of these wingers is going to have to fall out of the top six. So Ryan, what do you think about Mike Hoffman at this point? Can he still be at least a 30 goal, like 55 point guy on the Habs next year, like he was in St. Louis? I'd imagine it's probably too much to expect those Florida numbers again, right?
It's definitely too much to expect those Florida numbers again from Mike Hoffman. It was even honestly unreasonable to expect the numbers that he put up in St. Louis for a large part of the season. Like you said, he ended up with that 30 goal, 55 point pace, but Mike Hoffman was just on a 20 goal pace through the first 2 months of the season in 33 games. But Hoffman finished with 9 goals in 19 games to rescue his year and probably add at least a few $100,000 or another year to the current contract he just signed with Montreal. And 6 of those 9 goals in those last 19 games came on the power play. Hoffman had just 1 power play goal before that. So he was completely irrelevant for most of the season until that last final stretch where he really took off and also picked up like no assists during. For the season as a whole, Hoffman was just less dangerous at 5-on-5. It felt like he and St. Louis weren't a match, and we'll see if it's any different in Montreal. You know, you still have that ceiling when you're playing in Montreal as being a 55 point player that puts you on the high end of what you can expect any Hab to produce. So you could hope for Hoffman to be a hired gun on your fantasy team to try and add a goal when you need one. And maybe he'll get on the top power play, which isn't even for sure. But Hoffman wasn't someone I was ready to invest much in this year. And being in Montreal actually makes me more reluctant to expect huge things from him. So I wouldn't say that 30 goals and 55 points is something I'd expect. I'd say that's the high end of what I'd expect. I'd say that's at most what I'd expect. And I'm more realistically thinking he's going to land around 45 points, give or take 5.
Okay, I think I agree with you there. I would not be too excited to draft Hoffman unless he falls pretty far in my drafts. But who knows? I guess we'll see how he does. Obviously, Tyler Toffoli did a nice job when he moved to Montreal. So we'll see if Hoffman can sort of get a similar role there. Then some other moves that they made, minor things that hopefully help. Like I guess their other big signing is getting David Savard for 4 years, $14 million. Might be a bit of an overpay for this guy. Obviously I think all these players who come from Tampa end up, seeming like they're worth a little bit more because they just won a Stanley Cup. So I don't know. Obviously, I don't think David Savard is going to replace Shea Weber, especially not his fantasy production, but hopefully he's a helpful player on the blue line. They also signed Matthew Perreault, a former Keeping Karlsson favorite, Cedric Paquette, Chris Weidman, extended Armia and Lehkonen. But that's pretty much it for Montreal.
Yeah, I think so. And before we move on, just to be clear, because you mentioned the Logan Mailloux pick, and if you follow us on Twitter, you'll know how I felt about it. And I think the only comment I want to make before we move on is just that, the Canadiens did something that I think was indefensible. And now it's turned into a PR game where it's going to try and be massaged into something defensible and maybe something positive at the end of the day. Don't buy it. It was not something they should have done. It was like indefensible. It stays that way no matter how the story plays out from here. And it was really, really disappointing. I was shocked. Like, I was following the draft live when it happened, and it was a real big bummer. So let's hope that teams and the league do better from here on out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's stay in Canada and go to Toronto now, who have, also not had the most exciting offseason, but, some significant things here. Obviously, there was this whole acquiring Jared McCann from the Pens and then losing McCann to expansion. And then people lost their minds on Twitter, like, Dubas, what an idiot. McCann's I don't know, the way I see it is at the end of the day, they traded Hollander and a 7th to avoid losing anyone to Seattle, which doesn't seem like a bad piece of business. Obviously, it's possible that they could have kept McCann, so maybe it was a mistake to not, follow up in part 2 of that strategy being to keep Jared McCann, but I guess they wanted to keep Justin Hall, who I don't know, maybe it's harder to find a second pairing defenseman. Anyways, so that happened. In the end, it's like a net nothing. So we don't really need to dig into the fantasy impact of losing Jared McCann. They did lose Zach Hyman to UFA as he went to Edmonton. So that's a big piece gone. And they've brought in a lot of forwards. Maybe one of them can potentially get some Hyman-esque deployment and maybe produce somewhat like Zach Hyman did. So we'll see. So here are some of the players they brought in. Michael Bunting signed him to a 2-year, $950K contract. Perfect type of guy you want to bring in at almost the league minimum. 13 points in 21 games with Arizona Toronto last year for a 51-point pace, still only 25 years old. So I'm honestly surprised he couldn't get a little bit more money after that strong season last year, but potentially he could walk into a really nice deployment and then try to earn himself a raise after these 2 years. They also got Nick Ritchie from Boston for 2 years, $2.5 million per year. So Ritchie had 26 points in 56 games last year with the Bruins for 38-point pace, but really it was a tale of 2 seasons. He was like super hot to start the year. He was getting great deployment. He was on the top power play. Then he completely fell off. Both his deployment and his production ended the season like not being fantasy relevant at all. I believe signed Andre Kasha to a 1 year, $1.25 million deal. Another player from the Bruins, Ritchie and Kasha, both go from Boston to Toronto. So Brian, who do you think is going to play more games next year? Kasha or Antti Raanta in Carolina? I don't know. That's the thought. Kasha, just like, I know you like him. Guy never plays.
I know. He's never healthy. And it's a real big bummer because he started his career looking like somebody who had the potential to be a huge scorer, do a lot of damage, put a lot of pucks on net. But he got shaken up early in his career with several head injuries and just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And when he is healthy, it seems tentative. He doesn't seem like he's ready to play the same game he once did. And man, I can't blame him. So it'd be great if Kasha was healthy in Toronto. I think the signings Toronto made are all the great value attempts. And if just one of those 3 pans out, I think they'll have gotten bang for their buck. They're buying 3 kind of weighted lotto tickets. Bunting, by the way, is someone we shouldn't look past, even though he's the least known name on this list and maybe the most boring. But Bunting had 68 points in his last 74 AHL games, where he's slowly risen the ranks of scoring over 4 seasons and change with Tucson before coming in and making an impression in the NHL. And then Nick Ritchie has this potential. I think Ritchie and Bunting are probably the more Hyman type replacements, like the ones who can step into his spot. And then Kasha seems like the guy the Leafs could try moving into the Mikheyev Galchenyuk spot. In the top 6. It seems like there's room for 2 of these guys in the top 6. One of them's going to be the odd one out. I think it could be either one. Also, I don't know. I'm just going to throw this out there. Keep an eye on Josh Hosang, who's about to get a fresh start with the Leafs after some reasonably productive time in the AHL. And just remember that Hosang never really got a fresh start the first time around. Remember? Because he slept in and missed practice or something. This was with the Islanders 3 years ago. And he's been buried ever since. So we talked on a recent episode about guys who get so many chances in the league and guys who never even get one. I'm interested to see what Hosang can do now that he might have a fresh look.
Yeah, I mean, worth a shot, right? They're getting him on a playoff, or what's it called? Getting him on a PTO. Getting him on a PTO contract, and we'll see if he can make the team. Obviously, the Leafs have room for guys making league minimum contracts because they're spending so much money on their top players. Also, obviously, watch out for Nick Robertson, who maybe will be ready to take the leap to the NHL after having 16 points in 21 AHL games last year with the Marlies. Obviously, the other big change for the Leafs is in net, where they... Okay, actually, no, is it? Also, one other player they signed is David Kampf, who is not fantasy relevant at all, unless your league counts faceoffs. It's good for faceoffs. So there you go. He'll be a bottom 6 center there. Okay. And then obviously the other big change for the Leafs was in net, where they lost Frederik Andersen and gained Petr Mrazek. So basically a trade with Carolina, swapping injury prone goalies. So Mrazek comes to the Leafs on a 3-year contract, $3.8 million per year. Mrazek didn't play much last season, but he was good when he played. He had a .923 save percentage in his 12 games. He had injury troubles, just like Anderson, like I said. Obviously, now Mrazek joins Jack Campbell, who has 1 year left on his contract. Campbell was great last year, .921 save percentage in his 22 games with like almost no rest. Like, that's the kind of thing you have to keep in mind. I feel like maybe one flaw just looking at a goalie's save percentage is it's a lot harder probably to put up really strong numbers when you're playing it day in, day out. And that was basically the case for Jack Campbell. So I'm really excited to see what kind of season Campbell can have now with backup, since Anderson was injured for all of last year. So hopefully Mrazek is healthy. And Brian, do you think this is a tandem? I don't know. I kind of still see it as Jack Campbell as the starter and Mrazek as the backup, but I think there's definitely an argument to be made that it'll just be a 50-50 thing and someone has to earn the spot. I really believe in Jack Campbell. I'm just going to throw it out there. I think if he's rested a little bit more, I think he can put up really strong numbers.
I'm with you. I'd expect a tandem in Toronto, but also think the Leafs would be just fine and happy if Jack Campbell stepped up to run with the job. I think Campbell and Mrazek are essentially insurance for one another, as both guys who tend to get injured. Hopefully they're not both injured at the same time. I actually, when we were talking about the Raanta and who's Raanta playing with?
Frederick
Oh,
Anderson.
an Anderson tandem. We look to see who the next guy on the depth chart was there, and it's Alex Lyon. Do we know who the next guy on the depth chart in Toronto is that might be seeing some games this year?
Isn't it always Michael Hutchinson?
I mean, it is and it isn't. So I guess at this point, we should actually look it up.
Yeah, Adam, I do still have the Jack Campbell Young Guns. I probably should have just sold it when I had the chance, but who knows? Maybe they'll go on the real value will come if the Leafs make it to the Cup Finals and he's the goalie.
Okay. It is and it isn't. I think there's been an on-off moment, but yeah, Michael Hutchinson is signed for one more year, so it is possible that we have some more Michael Hutchinson time. We've also got Joseph Woll, who's 23 years old. Maybe he gets a look at some point. I don't know. Just be ready to potentially find some deep value in the Leafs crease if both Campbell and Mrazek get injured, which isn't the most unlikely scenario. But if I had to bet on one guy to play more games, it would be Jack Campbell.
Yeah, I think this could be another good tandem to draft, kind of like we were talking about earlier, I guess also with Carolina and also with one of these teams we were just talking about somewhat recently. Who was it? Boston, right? With Allmark and Swayman. I could see like Campbell or Mrazek earning the job either because they play better or because someone gets injured. And so you draft a tandem and you end up with a starting goalie on a really good team. I think this is going to be the latest you'll be able to draft a Leafs goalie in fantasy in a long time. So that's an opportunity potentially because I think they're still going to be a really good team next year. All right, so let's go now to Tampa Bay. Obviously, they have mainly subtractions from their team in their quest to become cap compliant. So they lost Yanni Gourde to Seattle. They lost Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow to unrestricted free agency. They traded Tyler Johnson and a pick to Chicago for Brent Seabrook, who will go right to the LTIR. And who do they got to replace all these guys? Well, we've got Corey Perry coming on a 2-year, $1 million per year contract. They've got Pierre-Edouard Bellemare also coming on a 2-year, $1 million per year contract. They've signed Brian Elliott to take over for Curtis McElhinney as Vasilevsky's backup. And then I guess that's it. Like, I guess the biggest offseason move they made was extending Braden Point for 8 years at $9.5 million per year. But Brian, are there any players on your radar that you could see stepping in to fill the voids from Gourde, Tyler Johnson, Coleman, and Goodrow? I don't know if it's necessarily going to be one of the guys that they signed. I'll throw out my first guess. So this is my cheat as being the host, as I get to steal your thunder. But the guy that jumps out to me is Alex Barré-Boulet, who just got a 3-year ELC again, which is weird. So he signed for another 3 years at just $758K. So lucky for Tampa, because this guy seems like he's good. He had 12 points in 10 AHL games last season, 56 points in 60 AHL games the year before. So this is a guy who's been a point per game guy in the minors. He got some top 6 deployment in his cup of coffee with the team last year. All of a sudden, there's a lot of opportunity opening up. So I'm very curious to see what Alex Barré-Boulet will do. I think he's someone I might draft at the very end of my drafts, depending on obviously on what we see during training camp.
Before I answer, I just want to rewind back to your question where you said, is anyone on your radar that could fill in the void from Yanni Gourde, Tyler Johnson, Blake Coleman, and Barclay Goodrow? How many of these guys did anyone have on their fantasy rosters last season on a consistent basis? Yanni Gourde was the closest to being rosterable, but even if someone does step into that role, the upside isn't huge. Think of what we saw from Gourde in recent years. He had these runs of relevance, but was largely a free agent in standard formats. The Tampa top 6 is still full up. If I was to pick somebody, I'd look at Alex Barré-Boulet, who maybe should have a word with his agent or someone who can advise him on how to have a word with his agent. Like, this is a year where he's going to step into a new role and he signed for the league minimum for 3 years. It's bizarre, very team friendly. I'm not sure exactly what else is behind that, but good for Tampa and hopefully good for him. He'll get the opportunity. He'll be valuable to the team on such a cheap contract and get lots of chances to prove himself and hopefully cash in as much as he deserves to cash in. I'll also just say, I guess, keep an eye out for Anthony Cirelli. He played with Tyler Johnson and Alex Killorn last year. Maybe he played with Steven Stamkos and Alex Killorn this year. And then my other Tampa note is just remember to put Andre Palat back down to 50 or 55 points because he's not going to have that power play 1 role where he picked up all those extra points because Kucherov was out. In fact, I'm going to call the shot here, Elon. I'm going to suggest that Andre Palat is going to be one of the most auto-drafted guys this season.
Interesting. The thing is, like, Palat could be on the top power play, right? Like Kucherov, Stamkos, Point. Then you have another forward that could be Killorn. Doesn't have to. I mean, Killorn's been there and he's not been there.
No, he's been really good playing the role he plays. He's the net front guy there. He goes and retrieves the pucks and stands in front of the net, puts away garbage.
Yeah, I mean,
he's got a lock on that role. That is not a
wow.
role for Andre Palat to play.
Do you want to make bet board that? Like the Palat and Killorn have been on this Tampa Bay team for a long time. Okay. There's been long stretches with Killorn on the top power play, and there's been long stretches with Killorn off the top power play. I definitely don't think it's a lot.
Who sees more total power play time between Palat and Killorn?
No, let's make it a better bet for me. Like you're saying Killorn is a lock. I'm saying I just want to bet that Alex Killorn will have a 6-game stretch where he's not on the top power play.
That can definitely happen.
Okay, so it's not a lock. Thank you. Argument 1. Let's go now to Ottawa and talk about
You didn't even pick up on the interesting part that I said, which is that Andre Palat, because he's going to be ranked so highly because of point totals from last year, but won't have the same opportunity this year, that he's going to be one of the most auto-drafted players.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're necessarily wrong. Like he could still be valuable. Like he's probably still going to be playing with Kucherov and point, which would be a pretty sweet line. And we'll see.
I'm not saying he won't be valuable. I'm saying he's going to be one of the most auto-drafted players.
Okay, so we'll see. What do you want me to say to this? Yeah, good point.
Do you disagree?
I don't know. Probably not. But there's probably someone else. Maybe Shea Weber will be more auto-drafted than Andre Palat.
Pretty low on draft list, though.
Okay, I don't know. I guess I'd have to look into it. That's a good point. Maybe that will be the case.
Thanks.
Palat had 46 points in 55 games last year for a 69-point pace, but in the playoffs with Kucherov back, he only had 13 points in 23 games. So obviously a dip that we are also expecting. Like I don't disagree. I don't know, but I don't know how to judge if he's going to be the most auto drafted. Maybe I haven't thought about it. Who else could be? Who's in the running?
Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know. He's just a name that jumps out to me. Also, you're going to know at your drafts, like especially if you're playing with casuals, like someone's going to pick Palat because they're just going through the list of top scorers from last year.
Maybe Jack Eichel will be if he's not, playing at that point. I don't know. Okay. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson. Who's going to be the most auto-drafted player? Will it be Palat or the field? Okay, so let's end in Ottawa. Not much going on here. They lost Joey Daccord to Seattle after protecting Philip Gustafsson. I guess the assumption is that Matt Murray is going to start next season as the starter until he struggles and or gets injured. And then I'd assume, this Philip Gustafsson will get a run. And why not? He was good. He only played 9 games last year with the Sens, but he had a .933 save percentage in those games, as opposed to Matt Murray, who played 27 games and had an .893 save percentage. Murray, by the way, has 3 years left on a $6.25 million contract. So that was a smart signing. And yeah, that's the Sens story. Oh, and they traded Dadonov to Vegas for Nick Holden and a 2022 third overall pick. No, and a 2022 third round pick. So Brian, I don't know, any thoughts on either Joey Daccord leaving or Evgeny Dadonov leaving in terms of fantasy impact for next year?
Not really. With Dadonov leaving, it's not like there's a ton of, look what Dadonov did in his spot, right? He had a lot of opportunity. You think maybe someone can step in, get the same opportunity and do better? Sure. But I think there's still a pretty low ceiling on exactly how high an Ottawa Senator can score, especially if they're not named Tkachuk, Norris Batherson, or Stutzle. Keep an eye on Alex Formenton, maybe Shane Pinto. If I want to go deeper, Nick Paul, Colin White, Logan Brown. But I can always name a bunch of guys on Ottawa who we think we haven't seen get a full opportunity yet. Just keep an eye on training camp and see what the depth chart looks like. But playing away from, if it is a Batherson, Tkachuk, Norris line, and if you're not Tim Stutzle, I'd be not that interested in having you on my fantasy team.
Okay, and that's the Sens. And this is another team that, like Detroit, I think they're going to be better next year, but probably still not that contender. And I think their best bet is to have Matt Murray not play many games. That's my personal opinion. So that takes us to the end of the Atlantic Division. This has been a blast, Brian, going through all of these teams. I'm sorry I no-sold your Palat comment. I think it was really smart. And thank you so much also to everyone who listened to the show. We hope you've been enjoying this little 4-part series that this is part 3 of, going through all of the fantasy action, all the fantasy implications of all the offseason movement for all the teams and all the divisions in the league. Let us know what you thought. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson. We love to hear from our listeners, even just to know you're out there. Say hello. If you want to check out our Patreon program, things are going to start buzzing very soon. We've already started buzzing a little bit, but we're going to keep going buzz as the season starts to approach. So keepingkarlsson.com/patron. Get in on our community. Get in for the couple, which we're going to be announcing very soon as registration is going to start. And with that, Brian, I think I'm done here. So let's cue the outro music, and you can go ahead and read us the credits.
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dauber Hockey and powered by our patrons. It was researched with help from Dauber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dauber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and NBC Sports Edge, and logo art by BrandonWeave.com. Outro music from Pat Roach.
Wow, you changed the order there. I like it. So you blew my mind. Okay, great talking to you, Brian. Looking forward to talking to you about the Central Division in just a minute. And the people listening to this podcast, you'll probably hear that Central Division episode very soon. So make sure you're subscribed to Keeping Karlsson on Apple or Spotify or Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.
Until then, remember, fantasy hockey. Until then, remember, no matter who the Montreal Canadiens draft, fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Good.
How about that?
Great.
Take that.
Take that, Logan Mailloux.
Well, it's more like the organization.
Take that, Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he asked not to be drafted. Not to say he's good. Anyway, let's go. Okay. So if anyone, Ryan's like, why are we recording on Monday? Yeah, I know. We're just trying to knock out some shows. So you'll have a lot of shows in your feed. Hope you're got some time allocated to listening to Keeping Karlsson episodes. Hopefully, like, we're not just doing too many shows, Brian, and then no one's gonna listen to them. Hopefully people realize, like, you can listen to this next week also. There's no rush. But like,
yeah, hopefully it won't be out of date.
Download the show. Then if you haven't listened to it in a day or two, delete it, download it again from a different IP. And I don't know what I'm saying. Okay. So let's do you have a joke for the Central? Adam gave me a really good one for the for this
Adam
one.
Crushed it, but it was too late.
Hosted by two guys who something about Kaprizov and
who
how
love being the central of attention.
Okay, sure. Okay, how about you do the intro for this one?
Do
it. It'll be fun. It'll be funny. We never do. Yell yes and say that joke. I like it.
No, that's much more. I want to hear you deliver the line.
Okay, fine.
I mean, I can, but why would we do that?
Why would
we have a winning formula here?
Okay. We're so winning. # winning. Remember that whole thing with who was that actor who wrote # Charlie Sheen? That was like
Tiger Blood.
That was an exciting week.
Was that like that was one of the first like global trends on Twitter, right? Like that's something that happened on Twitter that took over the world.
Can I make
a moment?
Yeah. I'm going to make a joke that's maybe bad. It was really funny. It was like a very viral thing. Everyone was watching that clip.
It was one of the first.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Again, it's saying? Like that Palat thing. I don't know. Like, I think so. Sometimes I don't know how to respond. It's like, I don't know, maybe.
What was your joke that was funny?
Okay.
That's not funny.
Hosted by two guys who might go start recording our podcast in Russia if Blue Wire doesn't pay us more money.
What? I don't get it. Because of
Kaprizov. If Blue Wire doesn't meet our contract demands.
I like Adam's nailed it again. Adam, you're hired, I think. Send Ben to the KHL and take Dave or Lewis to arbitration.
I kind of like mine better.
I don't think like we should threaten our network.
But it's a joke. And I'll say unless they meet our contract demands.
No.
Then
I'm just
gonna do it.
I think no, do Adams.
I'll do both versions.
Or do Central of Attention.
I'm gonna do all of them.
I vote Adam.
Okay. Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world. Edit point. Hosted by two guys who would send Ben to the KHL and take Lewis to arbitration. Hosted by two guys who love to be the central of attention. World. Hosted by two guys who might just go start podcasting in Russia if Blue Wire doesn't meet our contract demands. I'm your host, Elon Dabrowski, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, the fantasy hockey robot himself, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth part in our 4-part series of off-season action, where we go through each division one at a time and look at all the fantasy implications that happen. Also, some inside baseball for anyone listening. Elon recorded 3 jokes, and I'm not sure at this point in time while we record, like at the opening, which one he chose. If you want to see all 3, you can go to keepitkarlsson.com/live. But Elon, whichever one you chose, I found it so funny.
Maybe I used the one you suggested, which is hosted by 2 guys who love to be the central of attention, because today we're talking about the Central Division, and there's a lot of interesting things that happened with the teams in this division. I'm really excited to get to. We're going to start in Chicago. We're going to talk about Seth Jones, probably spend the whole show talking about Seth Jones because I acquired it in my Dynasty League. But first, let me just mention that we are presented by DobberHockey.com. It's a really cool site to be able to say we're presented by. I can't even think of another site I'd rather be presented by, to be honest, because this is the #1 fantasy hockey website in the whole world. Articles all the time breaking down the fantasy impacts of trades. We use frozen tools to prep all of our shows. I love frozen tools. So yeah, just Dobber Hockey. They know what they're doing. They're going to have that almanac coming out soon, right? Or they're going to have that digital fantasy guide coming out soon. So definitely keep your eyes up for that. So again, that's dobberhockey.com. But with that, Brian, let's get started. Let's go to Chicago. I'm just going to say it. I think Chicago is going to be decent next year. I'm not going to say something too crazy.
Wow,
I think they're gonna,
hot take.
I think
they're going to stick your neck out there.
I think with 10 games left in the season, they're going to be in the playoff hunt. I don't know if that's like saying anything a little bit more.
I think you could have said that about their last 2 seasons.
Okay, well, there you go. I think that with 3 games left in the season, I don't know. I think they're going to be better. Like, I think this is a team that might challenge for the playoffs and surprise people. So we already talked back in episode 349 about how they fleeced Edmonton, dumping Duncan Keith in his contract, getting back a pick and Caleb Jones. And then they put that extra cap space to work with 2 huge acquisitions. First, trading a boatload of assets in the form of Adam Boqvist and a pick that turned into Cole Sillinger just recently, and more picks. And in exchange, they got Seth Jones from the Columbus Blue Jackets. They also took on Marc-Andre Fleury's contract pretty much for free. They sent a player that apparently they're also keeping somehow in some kind of weird Schrodinger's trade. They also acquired Tyler Johnson from Tampa. They signed Jake McCabe to a 4-year, $4 million contract. They also traded Zadorov for a pick. They signed Jujhar Khaira and Adam Gaudetz. That breaks down everything. Oh, and Jonathan Toews is expected to return after missing all of last season with his chronic immune response syndrome. So all of that put together, I'm pretty excited for this team. Let's start with Seth Jones. And don't get me wrong, they totally overpaid for Seth Jones. They sent a lot of good assets, and then they gave Seth Jones this crazy contract. But regardless of that, just looking at next season, they've got Seth Jones coming in, finally a really strong defenseman to quarterback their top power play and play big minutes on this team that's desperately needing someone like him. So he paced for 60 points back in 2017-18 with Columbus. That was that last year with Panarin. And then since then, Jones has been steadily declining with paces of 50, then 44, then 41 points in the next 3 seasons. But now he goes from a bottom of the league offensive team with a power play that has been like a troubled power play forever in Columbus. He goes to Chicago, a team where Eric Gustafsson had a 60-point season 2 years ago. So obviously this is a team you don't even have to be so amazing. Just get in the right spot and you can potentially produce big time. Of course, Chicago not only paid that huge bounty to get Jones, like I said, they also extended him 8 years for $9.5 million per year. So he's going to be a tough hold in a cap league after this season, though potentially not a bad acquisition as a rental at worst. If you're in the type of dynasty cap league where you have the option to drop a player before their new contract comes into effect, he still has a pretty decent contract, I think $5.5 million for next year. So if the Seth Jones manager is someone who's not contending next year, reach out, say like, hey, I'll take Seth Jones. You're probably not going to keep this guy for that huge contract. Anyway, regardless, forget about if Chicago lost their mind a bit over Seth Jones. Got to imagine this guy is due for a huge surge in value going from Columbus to Chicago. Like I said, I think it's going to be a bigger surge in value than Sam Reinhart gets going from Buffalo to Florida. That's my gauntlet that I'm throwing out to Seth Jones. He'll continue to see big minutes up. He'll continue to see big minutes, obviously. Also get to QB a power play with Kane, Taves, DeBrincat, I guess Kubalik. Nice improvement over the squad in Columbus. So, Brian, I personally want to start Jones at a 50-point pace with upside for 60 or 65. Am I being too optimistic about this guy for next season?
I don't think you're being too optimistic, but I'm going to say that I think Reinhart has the potential to outdo his Buffalo self more than Seth Jones has the opportunity to outdo his Columbus self. I'm with you, though, that Seth Jones is going to have a great season this year, or in line to have a great season this year. Jones has a chance also to renew our faith in him as a legit top pair defensive options after a couple years where everything trended decidedly downward for Seth Jones and his reputation as a great top pairing defenseman. But in fantasy, of course, it doesn't even matter, right? We don't care if he's a legit top pair defenseman. We just want to know if he's going to put up the points. And Jones quarterbacking a power play with Patrick Kane and the other weapons you mentioned, anchoring a blue line with a few other options. And, oh, sorry, anchoring that blue line at all strengths with no other competition in sight on his team seems like a really good spot for Seth Jones, where he can just take this thing and run. Just remember, as we've talked about several times, the caveat with the player moving teams, it's unfair to PK Subban, I guess, although he could have just done better. But PK Subban struggled moving to another team.
Here, I'll throw a new one. I'll throw a new one at you, so you don't always say Subban. Jacob Trouba.
Okay, Jacob Trouba. Yeah, but he never got the role we expected. I was going to say with Subban, the difference between him and Jones is that Subban, when he got to New Jersey, he had Palmieri, Gusev, and Hischier, and a little bit of Hall on the power play there, whereas Seth Jones is going to have better quality personnel to work with on the power play that he's going to quarterback. So it seems like it should be harder for Jones to fail in this situation. I could definitely see huge value for him in Chicago. His best year was a 60-point pace, and that came with 24 power play points. I could see him getting those power play points and matching that career best pace again now that he's in Chicago.
Okay, so yeah, definitely someone to watch for next year, and I would bump him up your draft boards. Like, he's probably, if your draft is ranked by just last season's production, then Jones is going to be pretty far. And I think you got to take a look at that list on your draft day and bump him up at least to 50 points. I don't even think that's too much to ask.
Oh, at least 50 points. I think that's easy. I would say I'd feel pretty good thinking about him as a 50 to 55 point guy. Elon, I'm going to throw out a comparison for you.
Please, I love those.
It's your pick. You've got Seth Jones on the board and Jacob Chychrun. Who do you go for?
Ooh, I'll go Chychrun. But Chychrun is like so good. Like, that's nothing against Seth Jones. Like, Jacob Chychrun took so many shots last year. He scored all those goals. I know like Arizona's a mess, but they were like not that great last year too. So that's a tough one.
It is a tough one because Chychrun has so little around him, right? Garland got sent out. Ekman Larson sent out. You've got Christian Dvorak rumored to be getting sent out. Like, Arizona is going for the tank. It's almost like what we talked about on our Atlantic episode with Rasmus Dahlin. As much as we believe in him, it's hard to think of him as more than a 40, 45 point player.
Okay, I changed my mind.
How much more can you say for Chychrun?
Yeah, okay, I changed my mind. I think I want Seth Jones, actually. Good. I don't know. Oh, that's a really hard. I need to see some projections. I want to see what Dumb Decision thinks.
Okay. I think I go Seth Jones, but I'm with you. It could be close, but I go Seth Jones.
It could be also not close, right? Like, Jacob Chychrun was just so, like, especially in a league like a Cupful, which values shots, like, he was just at goals. Wow. All right. Yeah. Anyways, but even that we're like comparing these two shows how excited we are about Seth Jones for next year. Okay, then I guess let's talk about these other guys I brought up. So could Tyler Johnson get back to being that, I don't know, 50-ish point guy that he was in Tampa before that huge drop in time on ice and deployment last season? I guess it'll obviously depend. I guess it'll obviously depend on the deployment he gets this year. Like, I don't know, is he being brought into Chicago to be a top sixer or maybe more of a depth guy? Like, just looking at what the lines could be, I'd imagine, like, let's say Kirby Dach centering Kane and DeBrincat, then Jonathan Toews centering Kubalik and someone, right? Like, a question mark. That could be Tyler Johnson. I guess it could also be like a Alex Nylander or Dylan Strome. Maybe Kirby Reichel is ready to come up and take that spot. So I don't know. There's a lot of options. So I'm personally not going to be betting on Tyler Johnson, but if we see him in the top six, there might be someone to keep on your radar.
I guess so. I mean, we've seen Tyler Johnson play with great line mates before and not generate much fantasy value in recent history. So sure, if Tyler Johnson can hang around in the top six, you could look at him for about 50, but I don't think there's upside that goes much beyond it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then obviously last but yeah, that's fair. And of course, last but not least, let's talk about our reigning Vezina Trophy winner and Marc-Andre Fleury, who will try to prove that he can be as good in a much tougher situation with Chicago as opposed to with Vegas. So do you think at 36, Marc-Andre Fleury has it in him to do what his former teammate Robert Leonard did a couple seasons ago and put up a strong number? Oh, man. Do you think at 36 years old, now there's noise outside. Do you think at 36 years old that Marc-Andre Fleury has it in to do what his former teammate Robin Leonard did a couple seasons ago and put up strong numbers on this Chicago team that isn't known for having strong defense, even though they have Seth Jones?
They still don't have strong defense, right? This isn't going to be Fleury playing behind that great core and system in Vegas, but Fleury also outplayed his expected numbers handily last season. So it's pretty hard for me to say no, I don't believe in Marc-Andre Fleury when I've said that before and been burned. But he's another year older and the defense is weaker. And really, in Chicago, when you get past the second line and top D pairing, things thin out really, really, really fast and kind of dramatically. So that would be reason to not necessarily believe in Fleury, but I am not necessarily going to count out the possibility that the reigning Vezina Trophy winner is going to have another good season.
Yeah, I actually think, I know a lot of people have been saying like RIP Kevin Lankinen's fantasy value now that Fleury is coming in. I think if Chicago's smart, they're going 50-50 here, right? Or close to it. Like, why try to run Fleury into the ground? Like, it's not as if last year, well, I guess last year he did actually play a lot more than I expected him to, but I think Leonard was injured for part of that. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Like, Lankinen had this really strong rookie season. He kind of fell apart at the end, which I think makes sense considering that he was being run into the ground and like playing every single game on this like terrible team, at least defensively. So I'd be okay with drafting Kevin Lankinen really late because I think he could still put up decent, or maybe not. But like, I don't think that Fleury is going to be like this huge volume starter. Like, I'm not expecting him to be a Vasilevsky.
No, I don't think it'll be Vasilevsky, but I don't think it'll be 50-50. I think there is a way to optimize this tandem, though. You've got a 36-year-old Fleury and a young Kevin Lankinen who showed some real great promise before he just totally ran out of steam last season. So I could see Lankinen starting 30, maybe 35. That might be pushing it, depending on exactly what Fleury is up to and how much work it is to be behind that Chicago decor. But I don't think Lankinen's value is killed. But I do think he's not somebody that's going to be consistently rostered in a lot of leagues. He'll be someone you pick up for a spot start instead of thinking he's going to start every 2 of 3. Maybe he starts every 1 of 3.
Yeah, which maybe isn't terrible, but yeah, I guess, yeah, grab him for those spot starts and see how he does. I'm interested to see how Lankinen will do. Maybe it'll be good for him to have a year behind Fleury. Maybe now's a good time to trade for him in your dynasty or keeper leagues if you're thinking more long-term, because Fleury does only have 1 year left on this contract. Okay, so let's go now to St. Louis. So some decent movement on this team. So first of all, they lost Vince Dunn to expansion. Dunn mostly saw second power play time with brief times jumping to the top unit last year. Now there's really only Torrey Krug and Justin Falk to challenge for a power play time from the back end. I guess like Colton Parayko's there, but he got almost nothing last year. In general, we look at Krug, who had 32 points in 51 games for a 51 point pace last season. That's down from the 65-ish point paces he put up in his previous 3 seasons. He only had 13 power play points last year. So that's like a 20 power play point pace when he used to be closer to 30. Also, Krug had a super low 1.8 shooting percentage last year when he was generally around 5% or higher on the Bruins. So putting that all together, also with Vince Dunn out of the picture, so one less piece of competition, I guess, I'm kind of ready for a bit of a bounce back season for Torrey Krug. I'm not saying he's going to go nuts, but I think he could do better than this 50 point pace that he had last year.
I agree with you, but I'm not locking it in at all. Let's look at what changed for Torrey Krug in St. Louis and why he was only able to accomplish that 50-point pace. First, Torrey Krug had a much bigger role at 5-on-5 last year as a Blue than he ever had as a Bruin. And I wonder if last year that adjustment was hard for him to make. He played 18 minutes at 5-on-5 on average each night versus usually seeing somewhere between 15 and a half and 16 and a half minutes as a Bruin. He also lost power play time. On the power play, Krug also wasn't getting to shoot from the same type of dangerous spots that he did in Boston. So the opportunities that he had when he was firing the puck were not quite as likely to go in. So even though he might have had like this low shooting percentage, I don't actually think that's a big deal when he's had a higher shooting percentage. It's been because of the power play contribution he's made. And I don't know that the power play in St. Louis, it was set up to give him the opportunity to convert at the same rate that he did in Boston. So those are a couple things that didn't work out so well for Torrey Krug in his first year in St. Louis. We saw that Krug and St. Louis weren't quite as compatible as Krug and Boston were. They were like glove in hand, right? So I wonder, there's 2 things that could happen here to Krug's benefit. One is that Krug could adjust to St. Louis. Even better would be St. Louis adjust to him. It's like, okay, we see what you can do. We see what we've got. Maybe there's a way to build our system and our decor so that, hey, you have a more appropriate 5-on-5 role. And we do run our power play in a way that lets you contribute more. So I'm hoping that both player and team can make some adjustments so that Krug can get to be maybe a 55-point guy instead of a 50-point guy, but I wouldn't think of Krug that having the potential to bounce back to what he was in Boston, which is what we talked about moving from Boston to St. Louis and how perfect Boston was as a situation for Torrey Krug. I don't see St. Louis being that perfect situation or as perfect a situation for Krug, which is why I'm not going to put him up to his career highs, but I will hope that he and the Blues have learned some lessons, that Krug can move from being a 50-point player to a 55-ish point player.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And hopefully that shooting percentage improves a little bit, giving him a couple more goals, which would probably be enough to get him to be that 55-point player just in that. So yeah, I don't know. I guess in your draft list, Krug, if he's sitting still there as a 50-point defenseman, I think that would be a really good time to take in. And maybe you go for him even when the 55-point guys are getting taken off the board. Okay, so let's look at the forward end, the guys who Torrey Krug is going to be dishing to. And of course, it appears that Vladimir Tarasenko will be out the door, but they've got some players to take his place in the top six. We've got Pavel Buchnevich, who the Blues got from the Rangers for Sammy Blais and a 2022 second. And they also signed Brandon Saad, who they signed to a 5-year, $4.5 million per year contract. Let's start with Buchnevich, who had this breakout season in the Big Apple last year. His ice time jumped to 18 minutes and 44 seconds per game on average, and he finished the year with 48 points in 54 games for a 73-point pace. And sure, he spent most of his time with Zibanejad and either Kreider or Lafreniere, but it's not like he's going to be surrounded by like schlubs in St. Louis. Like looking at a recent tweet from Jim Thomas, who's a St. Louis beat writer, trying to guess some lines. He was projecting, how about like Ryan O'Reilly centering David Perron and Brandon Saad, and then Braden Shen or Robert Thomas centering the second line with Buchnevich and the other one. So Buchnevich is playing with Braden Shen and Robert Thomas. I don't know, not as good as Mika, but not absolutely terrible. So Brian, putting that all together, do you think Buchnevich can maintain the around like 70-point pace that he put up last year? I guess one of the reasons why you could say maybe he would is I wonder if he gets a power play role they didn't have on the Rangers. Like he was generally on the second power play on New York, but I don't see why the Blues can't try out a Ryan O'Reilly, David Perron, Braden Shen, Pavel Buchnevich, and Torrey Krug top power play. Those seem to be their top 5 players if Tarasenko's not there. So yeah, what do you think? Can we see Buch once again hit 70, even though he doesn't have Mika anymore?
Remember that Mika wasn't even Mika for a pretty substantial chunk of last year. And while Zibanejad did turn it on and that helped Buchnevich produce, Buchnevich still did what he did without being helped by Mika Zibanejad the whole way through. That said, I'm not about to give a unwavering endorsement of Pavel Buchnevich, who I've always liked, but I'm just not sure how high he can go. I'm looking at his numbers from last season, and Buchnevich has so many high markers of variance. His IPP is high, his shooting percentage is high-ish, his on-ice shooting percentage was high. All of these numbers that are flags for variance are all at or above his previous career high watermarks. And that's not what we'd like to see for these percentages. We like to see steady, even keeled, especially if a player is showing that they're producing to new heights. We want to see it happening on reliable, established percentages, which is not what I've seen from Buchnevich. He was also producing on the high end from a power play 2 role, although that won't be such a big deal if, as you're hoping, Buchnevich does land on the top power play in St. Louis. And I did mention off the top that I'm not like, yeah, he did well with real and sorry. Yeah, he did well with struggling Zibanejad and with succeeding Zibanejad. But even so, Robert Thomas is a centerman. I'm still not sure. He still hasn't taken that step forward that we're all waiting for. And Braden Shen had a bad year last year. And so did Jaden Schwartz, right? So there's no guarantee that just because you're in St. Louis's top 6, you're going to be able to produce. So that's why I'm actually feeling a little bearish on Buchnevich, even though I really, really believe in his talent. I want to stay safe with him, and I think 60 points is a safe spot to work with Buch at. I think he could actually be really good and eclipse 70 points. He has upside for more than 70 for sure, but for me, it's feeling like a big bet to place at this moment that's going to happen depending on where you draft him. Of course, I actually see Buchnevich as being one of the guys with the biggest range from floor to ceiling of anyone who's changed teams this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. And, we saw Mike Hoffman go to St. Louis. We just talked about it. He didn't get the role that we expected. And I didn't even mention Jordan Kyrou in these lines by Jim Thomas. And Kyrou could definitely take a top 6 spot. So who knows how this is all going to shake out. And I think that I agree with you that Buchnevich is not someone I would reach for, just because I think there is a bit of risk there, but there is potentially some reward for sure. And then as far as Brandon Saad goes, he's been a 45 to 50 point guy in his last 3 seasons, generally in a secondary role on the Avs and in Chicago. If again, if Jim's lines are correct, and I don't have any reason to expect that they may or may not be, they were just something I threw out there. But if Saad obviously can get a spot with Ryan O'Reilly, David Perron, that'd be pretty sweet. So we'll have to obviously see what his deployment is. But Brian, do you think that Brandon Saad still has it in him to be the 50 plus point guy that he used to be in his early 20s? He's 28 years old now. He's not like a really old man. He's been in the league forever, it feels like, at this point, and he's really fallen off lately. But like I said, maybe that was more to do with his role. Like, what do you think Saad's upside is going to St. Louis?
Well, it's been 4 years since Brandon Saad broke 50 points. And like you said, Elon, he's not getting any younger, although he's never really been in a spot where he's had a lot of opportunity to show that he can be a 50 plus point player. And line one in St. Louis would be great. Just harken back to what I said when we were talking about Buchnevich, that we saw Schenn and Schwartz be barely and not rosterable, respectively, last season in St. Louis. Not to say that Saad is guaranteed to suffer the same fate, but just that it can happen, especially when there really seems to be just one strong center in the mix. So I'd love for Saad to do great things in a full season with O'Reilly and Perron. It would be hard for him, I think, to finish below 55 points, but I'm just not sure that's exactly what's going to happen. So I would approach him with caution. I would think of him as a 50-point player with plus or minus 5 points, which I know isn't getting terribly specific. But this is all to say I'm not getting excited about Brandon Saad in St. Louis, but I'm not writing off either that he could step up into a level of production that he hasn't seen for the last 4 years.
Honestly, it does sound like you're kind of excited about him. Like 50-point player would be pretty good. That'd be higher than he's been in the past 4 years. So
I mean, he's been really close to 50, though. Let's not totally misrepresent.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be reaching to draft him or even considering him like a late round potential steal, just because I don't think the upside is so high. But, you got some steady, like at least a 45-point guy. I guess I definitely agree with you there. Let's go now to Colorado. So not too much changing with the Avs aside from in net, as Philip Grubauer pulled that shocking move on UFA day, signing with St. Louis. I was really confident that Grubauer was going to go back with the Avalanche. It seemed like such a nice fit. And, that really scared Avs fans for at least a couple hours, probably wondering, like, what are we going to do in net? But of course, then the Avalanche fans were able to breathe a sigh of relief as Saka got a deal done with the Coyotes, acquiring Darcy Kemper for a 2022 first round pick and a 2024 pick and Connor Timmins. So Darcy Kemper now comes to Colorado. He's a guy who's had 2 amazing seasons recently in Arizona, where he was like above 925 save percentage when he was healthy, before falling off a bit. Actually, I don't know if people realize that Kemper wasn't that great last year, so he didn't play very much. He had a lot of injuries. He only played 27 games, and in those games, he only managed a 907 save percentage. So not the Darcy Kemper we had gotten used to in the previous couple seasons. Obviously, now he goes to this fantastic situation in Colorado, where Philip Grubauer was one of the top fantasy options last season. And obviously, Grubauer is a good goalie, but I think obviously playing for Colorado had a lot to do with that. But to add in a wrinkle, we've seen news that Pavel Francouz is expected to be ready for next year after missing all of last season with a lower body injury. So I get what I was saying here. It's like, what is this joke I'm making? Okay, so I guess with Francouz, it's another Jonathan Toews situation, right? A guy who hasn't played in a while. Maybe people forgot about him. It's like a free acquisition. By the way, Colorado also has a Toews, so it totally fits. Anyway, a reminder about Pavel Francouz. He's a 31-year-old goalie who's done great wherever he's played in his whole career. Like, you might think like, oh, this is just some new guy. Let's see what he can do. But he's been awesome in the KHL. He was great in like the AHL when he played there. And he also had a 923 save percentage in the 34 games he played with the Avs in 2019-20. So if he's at 100%, the Avs, first of all, should be in a great situation for the team, right? Having this tandem of Kemper and Pavel Francouz. especially compared to last season where it was Grubauer or pretty much hard bust. All their other options in net were like really terrible. So Brian, do you think Kemper at this point is the sure starter like the patrons seem to think? He's been ranked as the 4th most valuable goalie in our rankings. Or could you see this being more like a tandem, much like when both Grubauer and Francouz were available and healthy in 2019-20?
It's hard to say because Francouz wasn't available in 2020-21, and there was no other option, even though the Avs brought in, for some reason, Devin Dubnyk and Jonas Johansson. There's no other option than Philip Grubauer at the end of the day. So we don't know what the Avalanche are going to do now that they have two, whether they'll go back to the tandem that they did run, the back and forth between Francouz and Grubauer, with Kemper, of course, taking Grubauer's place. Kemper, by the way, let's not assume that he's going to be up to the task of playing a full season or taking on a starter's workload. He's 31 years old. And Elon, guess how many times Darcy Kemper has made more than 30 appearances in a season?
1.
Nailed it. Way to go. In 2018-19, Darcy Kemper played 55 games, had a 925 save percentage, but Kemper's had his own durability issues the last couple years, missing notable time in each of the last 2 years because of injury. So I think that Kemper probably steps into Grubauer's place on the depth chart in Colorado as being the de facto starter, the guy with the leg up on being the 1A versus the 1B, or the number 1 versus the number 2. But Francouz is in the picture, so I would remember that before bidding big. You mentioned in our patron rankings, Kemper's right behind Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, and Lehner. I would say Kemper is a good distance behind those three just because there is uncertainty. I wouldn't want to invest a lot on a Kemper pick, even though it could pay off huge. He's a really good goalie playing for a really good team. He's had a hard time staying healthy, and there is someone in the crease to compete with him.
Yeah, I see Kemper as more around the value of like a Semyon Varlamov, like the type of guy, like a really good goalie in a great situation.
Yeah, that's
but
a good
with
one.
but with like a decent backup that could challenge. So I guess you have to decide, do you want to just have the safety of like every start he does get will be good, but you don't know necessarily how many he'll get. Plus, obviously, Kemper has these injury concerns, like you brought up. So that makes him potentially worse than a Varlamov. But yeah, maybe you just wait and get like a UC Saros, like one of these goalies who you know is going to get a ton of starts and has also been like really great lately, maybe not on as good a team. So I think the patrons may have gotten this one a little wrong. I think they ranked Kemper a little high. I didn't vote for him, but we'll see. Obviously, wisdom of the crowds. We'll see how it plays out. So yeah, aside from the goalies, the Avs pretty much stand pat aside from losing Jonas Donskoi to Seattle. So they re-signed Landeskog. They extended Cale Makar. I guess looking at Donskoi, he had a solid year last year, 31 points in 51 games for a 50-point pace, including 8 power play points. So that is a role that maybe can get filled. Maybe there's a new player who can take over as being a 50-point guy on this team. Watch out for Alex Newhook to get a full-time shot after dominating at Boston College last year and then putting up 9 points in 8 AHL games. I wouldn't be surprised to see Newhook put up Donskoi numbers in his rookie season. Okay, you don't have to comment.
Yeah.
Okay. And then speaking of young,
I guess I'll jump in.
Okay.
Hang on. Let me just pull up Donskoi for a second.
Bring up Newhook.
Well, I know Newhook. Well, there's nothing to bring up for Newhook.
Good numbers.
I think I'd be a little surprised to see Newhook hit 50 points, but I'd be happy to see it. I think given enough opportunity, he's got a shot at it, which is nice to say. And by the way, Donskoi had that 50-point pace only with 14 and a half minutes a night and playing on the second unit. He was helped along by a 20% shooting percentage. So Newhook is going to need a little more time than that or a fair amount of luck to get there. But I believe in his skill, and I'm looking forward to see him getting the most deployment he's ever gotten.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Calder odds come out for next year and see how far back Newhook is. If he's like further than like 10-1, he might be someone I'd place the bet on just because it's like a good situation. Also, Brandon Saad is out of the picture. So another person who will have to have his void filled in. And then looking at the D, Bowen Byram is there. So he might be ready to take on a higher role. I was about to say, look for him to take on an increased role with Ryan Graves, shipped to New Jersey, as we already discussed a few episodes ago. But I just saw today that the Avs signed Ryan Murray. So he'll obviously get pretty big minutes like he has during his career. So maybe we're still a year or two away from Bowen Byram being a really big impact fantasy player because the Avs are just so stacked on defense. Brian, so next up, we're going to go to a team that is not stacked in any position. But before that, we're going to take a little break. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. All right, we are back and ready to talk about the Arizona Coyotes, the team that's dueling with Buffalo for who's going to be the worst team next year. It's going to be like the Sens and San Jose Sharks from 1992-93. We'll see if they get to those levels. But yeah, lots of big names leaving Arizona. So they sent Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland to Vancouver in exchange for some bad contracts and some picks, including a 9th overall pick, who they ended up taking Dylan Genther. So we'll see how that works out. But obviously, that's not going to be too useful for next season. They traded Darcy Kemper, like we just talked about, to Colorado for Connor Timmins and that 2022 first. Ranta has gone to UFA. Aiden Hill traded to San Jose for Joseph Kajanash and a second. They lost Tyler Pitlick to Seattle. They got a bunch of picks to take on Andrew. They got a bunch of picks to take on Andrew Ladd's contract. They got a 2022 second pick to take on Shane Gostisbehere's contract from Philly.
You're telling me a lot of stuff, but I'm not hearing any actual hockey players ending up in Arizona. Ladd and Gostisbehere, but they were paid to take those guys, and all I'm hearing is assets and futures coming their way. Do they have a team next year in the desert?
I mean, they definitely have a future team if all of these picks pan out. But for next year, yeah, I don't know. Let's look at, so there is Gostisbehere. He's going to play. Andrew Ladd's not going to play, obviously, but Gostisbehere, he actually had a half decent season last year, right? When he wasn't benched, he had 20 points in 41 games for a 40-point pace. He averaged around 20 minutes of ice time. It's kind of weird for a guy who will either get 20 minutes of ice time or be benched. So that was a really weird situation for our friend Shane Gostisbehere. Brian, do you think that he can step into the OEL role and continue to produce as a 40-point defenseman in the desert, just like OEL did last year?
I guess there's a chance for Gostisbehere to reprove himself, although if he could choose one, I'm guessing this wouldn't be it. He's not been the most defensively steady player, to say the least, as of late, and there's going to be a lot coming his way. So I think the best we can hope for from Shane Gostisbehere is that he throws a bunch of shots on net, picks up some points, and maybe when he picks up some points, he can get towards 40. I don't know if this Arizona team is deep enough for two defensemen because they've got Chychrun. So for a second defenseman to clear 40 points, I'm just not sure it's possible. I, of course, am quietly hoping that Gostisbehere somehow reclaims himself and gains some trade value to the point that the Coyotes can then flip him to a team where he can produce. Of course, I'll never stop holding a candle for Shane Gostisbehere. So, but your question was, can he pull an OEL? 40 points? Yeah, sure. You probably put some more shots on net too than OEL, but I think that's a big expectation. Ekman-Larsson has been pretty difficult to roster over the last couple seasons, and I don't expect it will be any easier to hold Gostisbehere on your fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you're saying how maybe he would have not chosen to go to Arizona. I almost wonder if you're in a situation where you've been benched, maybe you want to go to a situation where all of a sudden you're actually one of the better players on the team and clearly not a bench option. So we'll see what happens to Gostisbehere next season. I think it'll be interesting. So aside from that, what did they do? They got Ryan Dzingel, signed him to a 1-year, $1.1 million deal. You might think this is totally fantasy irrelevant. Stop bothering me. I could be listening to something more interesting. I could be listening to Big Brother live feed updates. But Dzingel was good on the Sens that one time. And
one time.
But look at so someone's going to have to get into the top 6 in Arizona. Maybe you're saying no matter who it is, they're going to, still not be worthwhile. But I'm looking at who they have. So they have Clayton Keller. They have Phil Kessel for now. Apparently there's rumors that they're going to try to trade Phil Kessel.
Same with Christian Dvorak before you mention his name.
Okay, so they have Dvorak who they might trade. They have Nick Schmaltz. So it might just be Keller and Schmaltz. So someone is going to have to get the top 6 and top power play time. So maybe it'll be Dzingel. I don't know who else it could be. Maybe Barrett Hayton. If he can make the team. That pick was a really bad pick. Barrett Hayton at 5th overall, whenever that was.
We don't know that yet.
I mean, so far it hasn't looked very good. I guess we don't know for sure. I remember it was Brian, you're so defensive of these prospects that haven't gotten a chance. I remember I brought up that Philly really blew the pick taking Nolan Patrick 2nd overall in the draft when they could have had, Pettersson or whoever. And you were like, well, you never know. Maybe you're nice. You're a nice guy.
I'm willing to have patience. I mean, Barrett Hayton has had a very short pro career in which he's done very little. Last season, he had 3 points in 14 games with the big club, 10 points in 26 games with the little club, the Tucson Roadrunners.
That's
in the
not
AHL.
Good, Brian.
No, it's not good. Look, the Coyotes might have, if they trade Dvorak and Kessel, they'll have Keller, Schmaltz, Lawson Krause, and Barrett Hayton, and Ryan Dzingel. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And Jacob Chikrin and Shane Gostisbehere.
Now
It's
let's
not
talk about
looking good. Like this, if I were to pick one team that I couldn't draft a player from, actually, I'd probably pick Buffalo because I think I take Chikrin over Dahlin. But man, it's close.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. By the way, Brian, so the 2018 draft went Dahlin,
Okay.
Svechnikov, Kotkaniemi, which might also be a bit of a whiff. We'll see. Brady Tkachuk, who everyone was making fun of the Sens. You're like, what are you doing reaching for Tkachuk? He may be one of the best guys here. I don't know. Would Carolina trade Svechnikov for Tkachuk? Maybe it's close. I don't know. Would
Well,
Buffalo
Zadina went after like Tkachuk, then Hayton, then Zadina. Zadina was supposed to go top 3.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, so Zadina also, but then number 7, Quinn Hughes.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's kind of a fool's errand to look at the draft and say, oh, yeah, who could I have had 14 picks later or 3 picks later? Not to say maybe Arizona didn't do their homework. Maybe they overrated Barrett Hayton on, like, there's a lot of mistakes they could have made. I'm just saying, I'm not ready to write off the possibility. We were really excited about him for the last couple of years. So to go from excited to totally giving up on him, I'm missing a step there. I need to see more reason to give up on him.
Well, I mean, I just remember that at the time people were saying that it was a reach also. Actually, similar to what your favorite team, the Ottawa Senators, did in this draft, right? So I don't know too much about prospects, but I did hear quite loudly that Tyler Boucher may have been a reach at 10th overall when people had him at like 40th or 50th on their draft list going into the draft.
It was very strange. Their line to the fan base was trust us. So we'll see. Like, obviously the argument was, if you're so big on this guy, why don't you just trade down, since nobody else seems to know? I remember I was being crazy. I was watching 3 simultaneous live streams of the draft, and I was like turning the volume on and off of each of them, bouncing through, and all of them like were like flipping through pages or like digital pages. What do I know about Tyler Boucher? Like, oh my, where is he on my list? Anyway, we'll see if it pans out. We'll know in a few years, and then we'll know if the Sens front office is genius or just totally out to lunch.
Yeah. So that's
the nice thing about a team. When they go off the board, you can actually really evaluate their scouting and be like, oh yeah, did they know what they were doing? Like, if they just go with consensus, then you can't tell if the team was wrong or if all the scouting services were wrong. This is one where they really put their neck out.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. And I apologize to Coyotes fans who are excited for us to talk about their team at this point. There's not too much to talk about. I guess we could go in net, but you're not going to like what we're going to have to say, because they, like I said, they lost Ronta, they lost Kemper, they lost Aiden Hill, and in exchange, they've got Carter Hutton. Okay, so this is a guy who's had a sub 900 save percentage in each of his last couple seasons with Buffalo. Only played 13 games last year, had injury troubles. So he's brought in at a league minimum $750K. And then they've got Joseph Korshanash, who is also, from I've heard, not that amazing. I guess we'll see what he can do with potentially an increased role. I'd imagine, by the way, Korshanash is like the starter next year. Like, I have no faith in Carter Hutton. I guess we'll see. There's also this guy in the system, Ivan Prosvetov, who got some games last year and wasn't very good, either in Tucson or in Arizona. Man, so Brian, I don't know. How do we compare? Dell Anderson in Buffalo or Korshanash Hutton in Arizona? I've never seen tandems like this before in my history of like hosting this podcast with you. I've never seen a team with such bad goaltending.
No. And we had Martin Jones and Devin Dubnyk with the Sharks. And I think the difference between them and these is there's no hint of a starting goalie here, right? It was Martin Jones. Oh, maybe he can step up. It wasn't that long ago, but Hutton has never shown himself to be a starting goalie. Korshanash has barely played in the league. So I'm not feeling very confident. If you're in a plus-minus league, you might not even want Jacob Chikrin. You're in real trouble if you're drafting any Coyotes. So this is just a team to avoid, unfortunately. Kind of reminds me, do you remember when we were doing, was it our first almanac or our second almanac? Maybe it was the Canucks chapter, and we had nothing positive to say about the team. So we just talked about historically good Canucks. Do you remember this?
Yeah. Oh, it feels like so lot. Now they have so many fantasy relevant players. Good job, Jim Benning. Turn that team around.
I don't know if that's the lesson, but the upshot for Arizona fans is maybe in just a couple years from now, you'll have found a really great couple cornerstone pieces to be excited about.
Yeah, they could have had one in Quinn Hughes, but they took Barrett Hayton instead. Okay, so let's go to Dallas who was also pretty quiet. So I guess we're kind of rounding out the show. Dallas, Minnesota, Nashville, and Winnipeg all didn't really do too much. The biggest signing for Dallas, I guess, is bringing in 36-year-old Ryan Suter. They got him on a 4-year, $3.65 million contract after he was bought out by Minnesota. Suter actually had a really awesome season in 2019-20. I think people might forget that he had a career high 57-point pace in that season in 69 games, but he fell hard last season, only 19 points in 56 games for a 28-point pace. We went from his best ever season to one of his worst ever seasons. Now he comes to Dallas, where he's of course behind Klingberg and Heiskanen in terms of offensive opportunities. So IMO, and I'd imagine you'd agree, we're not expecting any fantasy relevance at this point for Ryan Suter. We're just hoping, or Dallas is just hoping, that he could be just a strong minute eater on the back end.
Exactly. And I think Dallas is a great spot for Ryan Suter to land. He plays well in a solid system, which Dallas has. And Suter can play with Heiskanen or Klingberg in the top 4. But at 36 years old and on a new team, I don't expect much fantasy value from Suter, especially with 2 power play quarterbacks ahead of him as it is. Maybe you'll get some good peripherals out of him. And I don't know, 30, 35 points. Even that seems stretching it. But yeah. No fantasy value here, except for perhaps some odd peripherals and maybe a point here or there. This is just being completist, right? There's no, we have to say Ryan Suter moved to Dallas.
I want to say something about Dallas. Yeah. I guess we could also talk about Braden Holtby. He signed a 1-year, $2 million contract. He has struggled for the last couple of years. He'd be an all-star compared to what I'm expecting from the goalies in Buffalo or Arizona. But for Dallas, so they get Holtby. They already have Hudobin. They already have Ettinger. They already have Ben Bishop. So Holtby's coming into potentially a crowded net, though there was a quote from GM Jim Nill saying, we don't know when Bishop is going to play next season, if he plays at all. So maybe they had to bring in Holtby because they're not assuming Bishop will play. Obviously, this isn't great for Jake Ettinger, who had a decent enough rookie season, a 9-11 save percentage in 29 games. He had some good runs there. I'm assuming now he's going to start in the minors since Hudobin and Holtby are in the system. And we look at Anton Hudobin, by the way, he had a down year last year. After taking the Stars to the finals, he only had a 905 save percentage in his 32 games. By the way, I don't really want to be one of these guys, an I told you so, shooting my own horn kind of guy. But I remember all last offseason going into the year, Brian, you remember this, right? I was like, Hudobin's never been a starter. I wouldn't expect him to continue putting up those numbers that he had last year now that he's actually expected to be a starter. And he didn't. So sorry, but I was right. So when it happens, I got to say it. Okay. Anyways, whatever. Hudobin still was awesome compared to Holtby, who had an 889 save percentage last year in 21 games with Vancouver. So Brian, how do you see this goalie situation shaking out? Seems like probably it should be a tandem with Hudobin and Holtby. Maybe Hudobin plays a little bit more. I'm not really convinced that Holtby has it in him to be that good. So I'd imagine Hudobin, if anything, this Holtby signing makes me think Hudobin will play more than if they didn't sign Holtby and they had Jake Ettinger as the backup.
Well, Leland, someone I know who listened to Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts podcast told me that on that show, Anton Hudobin was rumored to not be long for Dallas, that there is enough interest in him that he might not be there by the time the season starts, which means that while Bishop is injured, Ettinger gets a shot to outplay Braden Holtby, which seems pretty likely, right? Ettinger might be the best goalie, even if Hudobin stays. He might be the best of those 3 goalies on the roster after Bishop and could offer some solid value until Bishop gets into the lineup. He seems like someone, Ettinger, who you can draft and be ready to cut bait with. He's not going to be a full season hold, but he might help you for a month or two right off the top. For Braden Holtby, this is a safe place in Dallas for him to play, but I still have very low expectations for what he can accomplish. I think he's there as a veteran presence for Jake Ettinger while Bishop is healing. And then when Bishop is healthy, I'm actually not sure what happens next. I'm sure Holtby would love to reestablish himself and see at least half of the starts. But yeah, I am hoping, I'm going to make some assumptions here that Bishop is injured a while, Hudobin moves out, and that Ettinger plays a shade more than half of the starts and perhaps even has upside to play even more of those if Holtby still proves that he can't handle the workload.
Well, as someone who's the friend of someone who has a friend who listened to the 31 Thoughts podcast, clearly I missed this rumor. And if it's true that Hudobin gets moved, then yeah, give me Ettinger for sure in my fantasy drafts, because I definitely have a lot more faith in him than Braden Holtby. Okay, so let's go now to Minnesota. Ryan Suter's former team, who probably the biggest moves they made, at least in terms of headlines, was buying out Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. We already talked about that a couple shows ago. And they really didn't do that much else yet. We're still waiting for them to sign Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala. They should really do that. That was my joke, by the way, at the start of the episode. If that's the intro that we used, that Kaprizov has potential, or there was like news or rumors that he's potentially threatened that he's going to go back to the KHL, or that's potentially a possibility. The GM of Minnesota saying like he's not worried about that. So let's see how this plays out. Fiala just recently opted for arbitration. So I guess they weren't able to agree on a deal. So they're going to get Fiala for a year or two. And then I imagine he'll be a UFA. So we'll see what happens there. That would be a huge loss for Minnesota, but that's something to worry about in a year or two. In the meantime, what have they done? They signed Alex Goligoski. That's all I got for you, Brian. He signed a 1 year, $5 million contract. Goligoski had 22 points in 56 games last year for a 32-point pace. Perhaps with Suter out of the picture, Goligoski sees some increased power play time than he had in Arizona. Like he could be the guy instead of Suter playing on the second unit with Dumba, while like Jared Spurgeon is playing on the top unit. Maybe Goligoski can challenge for around 40 points again, which is probably the like ceiling of what I'd expect from him. He's potentially valuable in fantasy because he's great for blocks. And so if he could be like a 40-point defenseman with lots of blocks, that'd be good, but probably not something you want to bank on.
No, I wouldn't want to bank on much production from Alex Goligoski. He's the same age as Ryan Suter, and he also paced for roughly 30 points last season. So I'm not expecting 40 from Goligoski. I'd be happy with 35. And you might like the peripherals that Goligoski offered in Arizona. But when's the last time a Minnesota defenseman provided you with great value there? I don't think that there's the same opportunity for hits and blocks to be gathered in Minnesota as there were in Goligoski's former situation. So I see Goligoski as being less relevant now that he's in Minnesota, and he was just barely hanging on to relevance last year. So that's not saying a whole lot about his fantasy value.
Okay, so that's it. Hopefully we'll be talking soon about Minnesota re-signing Kirill Kaprizov. Oh, we won't even have that much to say. We'll be like, good. He's very good. Expect 80 plus points. That's what I'll say about Kirill Kaprizov when he signs, if he signs. So let's go now to Nashville and talk about a team that we kind of already talked about quite a bit in episode 349. So go and listen to that episode if you want to hear our breakdown of how they lost Ryan Ellis and Victor Arvidsson. I feel like saying they lost these players actually isn't probably the right word, because they traded them and got returns. Actually, what was the return for Victor Arvidsson? I think that was only a pick. So that wasn't really too much of a return. Regardless, they got Cody Glass in return, at least in the Ryan Ellis trade. Nothing too much else to report since that last episode. They extended Mikael Granlund for another 4 years, $5 million per year. So I guess we could strap in for another 4 years of Granlund barely scratching fantasy relevance once in a while and then falling off. They signed David Riddick to a 1 year, $1.25 million contract. So he'll back up Saros with Pecorine retiring. And that's pretty much all I got, Brian. So any fantasy relevance that you want to bring up for these changes on your end?
No, I don't think so. Mikael Granlund in Nashville is like the weirdest marriage, right? Granlund plays minutes for Nashville, and Nashville is a place where Granlund plays, but it doesn't seem like either side is giving the other maximum value, and yet they just signed on together for another 4 years at $5 million. So I'm glad Granlund has a contract. I wish he was in a place where he could do a little bit more. Remember those years, just before he went to Nashville? He was amazing in Minnesota. He had broken out, and it was so exciting. And then splat. He arrived in Nashville and did very, very little. So that's a bummer. And David Riddick ending up in Nashville, I think, is good news for UC Saros. I think it's good news for UC Saros. We talked in the Pacific episode about how the Canucks had backed up Demko with Halak.
Can you just take this whole thing again?
Okay.
Take it too slowly.
Okay. And then for the Predators getting David Riddick, I think that is good news for UC Saros, actually, because you think back to our Pacific episode where we talked about the Canucks and how they got Halak to back up Demko. Halak is probably more capable of stepping in than Riddick is. So that means that Nashville might have to rely on Saros, whether in good times and bad. And so if you're looking for volume, that makes Saros a better play, in my opinion, than Demko.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like too much volume might be bad because then you get run into the ground. So hopefully Riddick could be decent enough when he plays. I'm hoping for Laurent Brossoit upside from David Riddick when he, was spelling Connor Hellebuck. Now we'll see how he does spelling Robin Leonard over in Vegas, if you remembered. It's a fun trivia question for your dinner parties. What team is Laurent Brossoit going to be on next season?
Robinlehner.
I don't understand.
You said spelling Robin Leonard.
Oh.
Sorry.
Good one. Okay, on that note, okay. All right, and let's finish off, Brian. We've covered 31 teams. Why not one more in this 4-part series? Let's go to Winnipeg. And since we're going in decreasing order of interesting things that happened, we're not going to be ending with a bang here because Winnipeg also did not do too much in this offseason, at least so far. So they lost Mason Appleton to Seattle. They re-signed Paul Stastny for another season, which I guess, if things stay the same as they were last year, that might mean that Pierre-Luc Dubois and Nikolai Ehlers once again find themselves on the outside looking in for that top power play. I guess the biggest changes have come on the back end. They acquired Nate Schmidt from the Canucks for a 3rd round pick in 2022. They acquired Brendan Dillon from the Caps for a couple of picks. So I don't know, not much to say there. Like, I know Schmidt struggled a bit last season, definitely fell off offensively from his Vegas days. Maybe this is not even like, I wrote this question. I don't even see why I should ask it. I don't think anyone's expecting Nate Schmidt to be fantasy relevant. I don't know. Do you think Nate Schmidt is good?
I think he's good. So maybe he finds a little more value. It never seemed like a fit in Vancouver, especially a Winnipeg decor that's going to lean on him. Decent chance maybe his hits bounce back for the first time since leaving Washington. He used to hit Nate Schmidt, and then he went to Vegas, and that wasn't part of the game plan there. And then he went to Vancouver, and nothing was part of the game plan there. If you're looking at Nate Schmidt for fantasy value, you might get okay peripherals and meh production. I'd prefer him to, say, Alex Goligoski, but he's still not somebody high on my list.
Okay, yeah. I guess like the one thing about bringing in Schmidt, bringing in Brendan Dillon is maybe for once Winnipeg won't have bad defense. Like maybe this could be good for Connor Hellebuck or maybe bad for his fantasy value if he'll have fewer shots against. Like they've got Morrissey, Schmidt, Brendan Dillon on the left, Pionk, DeMello, and Heinola on the right. I know people were worried about Dylan DeMello potentially getting taken by Seattle, but that didn't happen. They took Mason Appleton. So I don't know. They also have Logan Stanley in the mix. So maybe they have a decent enough top 6D core. What else can I say? Oh, they got Eric Comrie to be the new Laurent Brossoit. So right. That's going to be your backup for Connor Hellebuck next year. One of the most irrelevant positions in the league, the backup of Connor Hellebuck, only behind Brian Elliott, who is backing up Andrei Vasilevsky next season.
Yeah, and if the name Eric Comrie sounds familiar, it's because he was also the old Laurent Brossoit, and now he's the new one too. So but I don't even know, Elon, like you're saying, maybe the Jets defense is better and that helps Hellebuck. I'm curious to see. He seems like one of these goalies that really thrives in chaos. And I can't imagine that better defense is really going to hurt him. But I am curious to see if there's like a different rhythm or something. He survived whatever the heck was happening in the Winnipeg backhand last season. And I'm sure he'll adjust just fine to whatever the new situation is. I don't even know why I'm talking about it. I have him in that top 3 group of goalies with Vasilevsky and Lehner. And I don't feel compelled to change it. Although, if I was to say that one of those 3 is going to have a down year, if I had to pick one, I'd say Hellebuck is the most likely.
Oh, I'd say Lehner is the most likely. But I know you love Robin Lehner so much.
Yeah.
Brian, we did it. We made it through all 32 teams in 4 episodes. And here we are. We're totally up to date on everything that's gone on in the NHL, I think, except for the draft. We still need to do an episode about the draft at some point. But aside from that, I hope you've enjoyed. Now I'm talking to the listener. I hope you've enjoyed these episodes. Let us know if you did or if you didn't. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed it, we'll of course take that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you didn't enjoy it, then just why are you even listening at this point? That'd be so rude to listen through all 4 of these episodes. You didn't like it, then leave us a bad review on Apple Podcasts. You must have liked it a little bit if you made it this far. So I'm assuming I'm talking to no one at this point. Anyway, why am I rambling here? Okay, we got our Patreon, keepingkarlsson.com/patron. Check that out. But with that, let's get going here, Brian. Let's cue the outro music. Why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons. Logo art from BrandonWeeb.com. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap, Friendly Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and NBC Sports Edge.
I guess we haven't talked about Evander Kane and these alleged rumors of him gambling. So anyways, that's the one thing we haven't discussed. But what is there really to say? Watch it. If you have Evander Kane in the keeper league, who knows?
We'll I mean, we got the news at the dawn of this past season that he was filing for bankruptcy and like everything was thrown in the air, and he had a really, I don't know, there's a lot to talk about.
Not really for our podcast anyways. That's more that listen to 31 Thoughts.
There's a lot of off ice stuff to talk about which we know nothing. I guess we'll just wait and see whether he's playing or not come October.
Okay, so now we've covered everything. Okay, so great job as always, Brian. Looking forward to talking to you on our next episode, where I believe at the time this episode is dropped, because we're recording this in advance, I believe there may already be our episode interviewing Lisa Dillman about the LA Kings. That should have also maybe already dropped. So great job, Ben.
I don't think it will have.
Oh, okay. Great job as always, Brian. I think.
Just say we have some more 32 beats coming up.
I'll say. Coming up soon, we've got some more 32 Beats interviews coming up. Brian and I. We're also going to start talking about the Cacupful. We've got an episode planned about league design and announcing all of the exciting rule changes that we've got planned for the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. So make sure you are subscribed. And until then, Brian, what should people do? Because I'm curious. What should they do?
They should remember that fantasy hockey really is for everyone.
Really is. Bye.
I feel like you're mocking me every time.
Why? I've been saying it at the end of the...
I just didn't know that I'm always not sure. Like there should be something to remember. It should be help make sure. That's what I gotta start saying.
Yeah,
help
remember is
make it so that fantasy
hockey. Want to do it again? Until next time.
Until next time, do what you can to help make it so that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Yeah, I like that a lot better.
Boom.
There you go. You just touched up an already good outro into a great outro.
Boom.
Boom. All right. Oh, so Adam, let's do it. I don't even know how to lock in this trade.
What's the trade?
It's a really boring trade for you, Brian. It's
no, I hope I wasn't clipping this whole time. Uh-oh.
Were you?
I wasn't. Yeah.
What was your mic volume at?
It actually shows it's not accurate.
Did you have that feature on in Zoom where it's changing the mic volume?
Oh man, so it wasn't at first, and then about 17 minutes in, it started.
Yes, it's probably the Zoom thing.
Ugh.
You have to make sure to uncheck that thing. It's okay. I'll use your Zoom audio, which is never as good. Oh well, and it's gonna have the fan, which now is for no reason because we didn't even need the fan because we didn't need Audacity running because we're not even using it.
Oh, my fan would have run anyway.
Okay. Oh well.
I'm gonna still send you my audio in case. That's a bummer. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's only 2 episodes of the show.
It went crazy.
Yeah, you have to always check that Zoom audio feature. You should make a checklist of all the things. I've got a checklist in my brain. But it used to be an actual checklist. Then I started remembering.
I think what happened. So I'm gonna buy a new mic.
Oh yeah,
so
I think a Yeti.
I know. I'm gonna because every time I just this one jiggles, it disconnects and reconnects, and I think that's what happened.
Oh my god. Okay, I think so. This is episode 356 and 357 of the podcast. Are you the podcaster who's done the most episodes that has the worst microphone?
My microphone I think it's possible. Good.
It's old and it's had these issues before. You're saying this is a known issue. We're on a network. We've got some listeners. I just don't get how it's you should have a very reliable microphone. But whatever. Who am I to judge?
Well, you're you to judge.
I'm me to judge. Well, whatever. We'll use the I thought your audio was fine on YouTube at least.
So Elon, you're getting the 3 waiver wire pickups, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I'm getting exactly.
I love your waiver wire pickups. Can I guess can I guess what you'll do with one of them?
Well, is it something I've told you? I don't want to give you.
Yeah. You were asking me if it was worthwhile back when you were in town.
Well, don't say it now because Adam is my opponent. And what if he ends up picking up the player that I want to pick up?
Okay. All right.
I don't even know who you're talking about, but
I want to say that Alex Salmon might be coming back.
Alex Salmon? Was that the player I was asking about?
Yeah.
I do not remember that. Was I drunk at the time? Oh, I already got Parisi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I added him. And I don't even have room for him on my team. I don't even know if this is a smart. I might drop him. We'll see where he If he says on the Islanders, is he even that good? What are we expecting? What's the upside for Parisi on the Islanders? 40. Yeah, so why did I waste 45. A move? Now I'm trading draft picks for moves because I'm so nervous about running out of moves.
Yeah.
And I wasted one on Parisi. Adam, how many ads will you give me for Parisi? Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, chat. you're all the greatest. Thanks
Oh, yeah.
for being here.